Hey, so I filmed this intro once before, but honestly, it kind of sucked. It sounded a little pretentious when I was saying it, and I was kind of awkward. Actually, I would say I was pretty anxious. I was reading from a script in a really awkward way. I still am, but maybe a bit less awkward. But I wanted to make a good impression, so after getting into the groove of reading and performing the script a bit more naturally, I thought I ought to come back to this intro and start on the right foot. Now, I don't imagine a lot of people are going to watch this besides a few family and friends who I have obligated to, but on the off chance that you are a stranger to me, my name is Andrew. I am 26 years old, and I recently graduated with my master's in English with a focus in poetry. Personally, I'm a really big fan of poetry, but also fiction and TV and movies and other media. On YouTube, I'm a really big fan of long form content like essays, reviews, and deep dives. And recently, I have felt inspired to carve out my own little corner of the internet. This is my cat Zelda. You've probably already seen her tail a couple of times, and she's gonna try and interrupt me a lot. Starting this channel, I don't really think I'm gonna do great at the whole performance aspect because I'm still learning how to write a script and also be myself and maybe be a bit funny or maybe a bit significant at times. But I know at the very least that I want to get started so that eventually, in the long run, I can get better at using this platform. The whole reason I really sat down and started in the first place is because after graduating, I felt like I was misplacing a really important part of myself as a critical thinker and consumer. I moved to a new town, away from a lot of my college friends, and I feel like I need to re-engage my passion for a good story. So this channel, even if it just ends up being a journal for myself, I want it to serve as a force or a motivator to keep me critically thinking and focus on stuff that I love. At the end of the day, if this video reaches anyone besides myself, all I really want to do is hold a conversation. So I was thinking about my channel and what I might want to discuss. I thought about myself as a consumer of content first, and what I like to see my favorite creators put together. I personally really love video essays talking about movies and TVs and books, regardless of whether those essays are really thoughtful deep dives or if they're a bit more superficial and more of a review. I like something that I can watch the first time with a focused investment and then later replay in the background for comforting noise or as I'm falling asleep. So when it comes to the kind of content I like to engage with in these video essays, I'd actually say I have a fairly limited scope in terms of how I choose a video. I want to choose a video about a media that aligns with my genre tastes, but that I know I'll never watch in my free time. I want something that usually wouldn't take my direct interest because then I could just pursue the original content if I really cared. I'll choose something that exists in my periphery of pop culture and the general cultural gaze, but nothing that's a hot topic right now. Which is to say, if I'm clicking on a Jenny Nicholson video about, say, the Vampire Diaries, I do it because I love supernatural content, but I know I'm never going to watch 8 seasons of vampire melodrama. If I'm watching like a Mike's Mike video, I know it's because I like pop culture and I like a good mystery, but I cannot imagine myself personally investing in Pretty Little Liars for more than a couple hours in my entire lifespan. It's why when I click on a Bad Movies and Beat review by Kenny JD, I'm doing it because I love to listen to her rant about a really bad movie like The Kissing Booth, but I really don't want to invest my entire night into consuming that trash content. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to have fun with a topic that I love and chat about a great series, which if you've seen the title you know is Buffy. I feel like Buffy is one of those TV shows that people can get really heated about because I know ever since its inception, Buffy has been a really popular focus for academic and critical thought. But I didn't want to put too much pressure on myself for this first video, so for my part, I really just want to take a deep dive into the shallow end and have fun with it. I do want to talk about the whole series, but I have way too much I want to say, so I'm focusing this first video on the first 3 seasons, and I'll cover the rest in the future if I happen to do this ever again. Hopefully I will. That said, there are going to be significant spoilers ahead, so if you ever plan on watching the show, which I do recommend, then it's possible this video isn't for you. I also want to say minor trigger warning, there are bodies and mild gore in this show, although it is obviously fake, so I would just suggest evaluating that on your own terms. That's all I really wanted to say for the intro. What you're going to see next isn't me in this shirt with this hair. You're going to see me at a different time from the past. Like I said, I refilmed this intro, so what you're seeing now after this is the oldest salvageable footage that I would still like to use. So I might sound a little nervous in it, but I do warm up to the camera, so please give it a shot. Thank you. So Buffy as a TV show first aired March 10th, 1997 on the WB channel. It ran for just over 6 years, or 7 seasons total. making one network switch during its run to UPN after its 5th season. Buffy had 144 episodes total, and if my math is mathing correctly, every season after the first had 22 episodes, while the first only had 12 because, as it turns out, Buffy was a mid-season replacement for a different show, Savannah. Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a TV show is actually a spin-off from a movie of the same name that premiered in theaters 5 years earlier in 1992. Fun personal fact about that, I actually have never seen the original film, and you would think from my research I'd spend like an hour and a half watching it, to build my ethos or something, but I really didn't want to. When you've gone so long without something, you've just not done something ever, and it becomes like some microscopic part of your personality that no one except for yourself really knows about. I guess that's what that is for me, and now I'm feeling stubborn about it. I just don't want to watch it. From what I've read, the director of the film version, Kaz Kazooie, and Buffy's original creator, Joss Whedon, had creative differences in terms of certain story beats and the overall tone. If I remember correctly, Joss actually wanted to make it a lot darker, while Kaz wanted to make it a lot lighter so that it could appeal to a larger audience. So when the show started rolling around and Whedon took over control, the show's production shifted dramatically from the first iteration of Buffy to the second. And I will talk about Joss Whedon at some point, but honestly, not right now, please. So in the 5 years between the film and the show, the entire cast and a large chunk of the production team changed, and plot-wise, the only relevant narrative to continue forth into the new series is how Buffy, at her old school, burned down an entire gymnasium to kill a bunch of vampires. Apparently it was very dramatic, and the show's pilot itself begins afterward with Buffy moving to a new town with her mother and beginning anew in Sunnydale, California, with a brand new reputation and a very bad school transcript. If we're to start right at the beginning, the central cast begins with Buffy Summers, played by the beautiful and elegant Sarah Michelle Gellar, as she attends her first day of her sophomore year. She is the Vampire Slayer, the Slayer of Vampires, and being marked as the chosen one to protect all mankind against the darkness is a big bummer when understandably all you want to do is date a few boys, enjoy your birthday party, and not flunk Spanish, I guess. But no, she's been imbued with the sacred ability to kick ass and dust baddies, and anytime Buffy gets the opportunity to monologue about how she hates this job, which is a lot, there will inevitably be some iteration of this complaint whereupon a vampire impedes on her somewhat normal life at the time. If we're to follow the pilot, a lot of things get set up as Buffy attends her first day of class at Sunnydale High, so I'll be going to this episode with a bit more depth and detail than many of the following entries in this season. Those other episodes may have a few expansive plot devices and elements sprinkled in, but largely they focus on the monster of the week, whether that is a sexy praying mantis who's also their science teacher, an Inca mummy girl disguised as a transfer student, or a pack of cannibalistic bullies possessed by hyenas. That's right. All great and maybe questionable episodes, but ultimately they're less relevant when considering the bigger picture. To explain, each season of Buffy has what the characters and writers and even the fans refer to as the big bad. It's a big character trope now. Buffy started a lot of those back in the day. And this big bad is an especially powerful or persistent evil that is hell-bent on destroying Buffy and or taking over the world, if not destroying it. If the plot isn't moving in that direction, chances are I'm going to gloss over it. So Buffy's going about her day, she's looking cute, she has a steak in her bag, just normal girl things. The first person she actually meets is Xander, but the first thing I really want to point out is this random shot of Xander. This is another central cast member riding a skateboard, and I don't know why he's doing this. I bring this up because Xander never skateboards again. According to Joss Whedon, the setup for this shot and the coordination for it, of the camera, along with all the extras in the background, really made it difficult to accomplish, and took a lot of money, I guess. And afterward, the entire team was like, psych, that is not a character trait that Xander has anymore. Let's get rid of it immediately. Later, Buffy runs into Xander in the hallway, helping her pick up a few things she's dropped. It's a good time as any to really introduce him. Xander is a pivotal member of what will soon be known as the Scooby Gang, which is this tightly knit main cast who are all in on the big vampire secret, and who will soon see work together as a team to protect Sunnydale, combining their strength, their wits, and their smarts to combat a greater evil. Xander, if we're trying to think of what he contributes to like a group dynamic, I'm guessing it's heart, but that always felt like a gimme answer to me when dividing up character tropes among all of the cast, a sort of leftovers trait handed out when all the other more pivotal roles are taken, be it like the Hufflepuff house or actual Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Hot take, I know. A character like Xander is meant to be the goofy, fun-loving guy who tells jokes and eases tensions, but the problem is with Buffy, you have an entire cast of witty characters spouting one-liners and speaking Whedonese, also known as Buffy speak. So it begs the question, what does Xander have that's unique to him that he can do better than anybody else? And that, very pointedly in the series, is usually nothing. Xander often struggles with justifying his own position in the group, mostly because he is neither the strongest nor the smartest. And if you ever look closely at both his shorter and longer character arcs, you'll see he either reaches an epiphany that he is in fact important to the group, or all that angst and resentment of inferiority weaves itself frustratingly into his next self-deprecating joke. If you can't tell already, Xander isn't exactly my favorite character. His sense of inferiority often makes him whiny and possessive, largely of Buffy, because he has this open secret of a crush on her. I know all this is intentional on the writer's part, and I think the team does a great job of making every character both interesting and imperfect, for the most part, but Xander's darker personality traits really rack up episode after episode. I have to remember that Buffy came out long before streaming services were ever a thing, so the concept of binging entire seasons of a TV show, at least by that name, binging, wasn't as common. Arguably in smaller doses, Xander is a lot more interesting. Also, this is just a reminder to myself to talk about the Zeppo in episode later on in more depth. It's all about Xander. I'm giving myself that reminder right now. Anyway, it turns out the next character Buffy meets is Cordelia, and she's an interesting feature of the main cast who I want to put a pin in for now. All you really need to know at this moment is that Cordelia's hot, she loves fashion, she comes from a rich family, and she's a bitch. It is great. I love her. She and Buffy hit it off in class, positively, but spoiler alert, this friendship isn't going to last for long. Buffy meets the next main cast member when she visits the library to pick up a few books for her classes, and what would usually be a really quick trip in and out for a textbook turns out to be an encounter with someone who, at the very beginning of the series, is really just Buffy's cranky British babysitter. It's Giles, Rupert Giles, the very new librarian and a person Buffy's never seen or heard about. He knows who she is as the Slayer, but she doesn't know who he is as her Watcher, and when she says her name, boom. Drops this big book you'll see in every credit sequence for at least half the show. He seems excited at the prospect of meeting her, but she absolutely hates that. Books it out of the library in record time. Also, a dead guy is found in the girls' locker room, but anyway, dead bodies aren't really remarkable in this show. He's just a means to an end at this point. We saw him still alive in the show's very first scene that I did not talk about. That's Darla. She's a cheeky little vampire in season 1 with a whole lot of backstory that I don't have time to go into right now. She killed this guy, she put him in the locker, it's very dramatic. Who cares about a dead guy when Buffy finally meets one of my favorite characters in the series? And honestly, I don't think that's an uncommon opinion. A lot of people like her. It's Willow. Nerdy wallflower Willow. Buffy briefly saw her earlier when she was talking to Cordelia, but now they've finally met. On the theme of trying to be a normal high school girl and doing normal teenager things, Buffy's asked Willow for help catching up on schoolwork. Xander shows up and so does their friend Jessie, but I'm not focusing on him right now. I am focusing on Willow. I'd actually say it's really hard to talk about Willow in retrospect because when you take into account just how much character growth she experiences over 7 seasons, just how much she comes out of her shell and learns about herself and her passions, looking back at season 1 really makes you realize just how sheltered and unblossomed she is. She's the stereotypical nerd. She's not good at talking to boys at all, she gets picked on by popular girls, and she has a crush on her best friend Xander. They're very endearing traits, and on the surface they might feel stereotypical. But I don't know, there's a certain weight to Willow's character in season 1 of timidity and repressed feelings that makes her feel more fleshed out than the nerd stereotype. To add to that, there's a levity to her. She's not a fighter, but she intensely cares for her friends, and in times of crisis, she doesn't cower away from the face of pure evil. She's brave despite her fears and her inability to fight. She's infinitely resourceful, and she has this continuous positivity. Or maybe I should call it hopefulness when talking with her friends and tackling tough situations. Willow especially favors the kind of cheeky writing that's so integral to the show because it elevates her from the basic image of a dork to someone who, despite her initially shy demeanor, can really come out of her shell when she wants to. I think you can really find these traits popping out more once we enter season 2 and beyond, because the bond she builds with Giles and the rest of the Scooby Gang, they allow her to carve out this space for herself to be more confident in everyday situations, even if she stumbles over her words or isn't sure what she's saying is right. I think I'm going on a bit long about her, but the point is here, Buffy and Willow have found a friend in each other in the first episode. This pilot actually poses them as foils, I'd say, particularly when we consider their confidence and their forward sexualities or lack thereof. Buffy is obviously confident in herself and forthright. Meanwhile, Willow literally cannot speak to guys. She has a whole conversation about it with Buffy in a club where she's like, I literally cannot speak. Anyway, there's some banter between the girls and the guys before Cordelia comes up and tells them about that dead body that was found. Did you already forget about it? Because I did. This next scene I actually find to be bizarre. Because Buffy, despite wanting to be a normal girl, cannot help herself from investigating the scene and finding that body. It's not that she wants to find it that's weird to me, but do you see this scene that she comes upon? There is literally nobody around. Where are the police? Where is the CSI team? I guess in retrospect, this scene in this episode entirely set up a precedent that Sunnydale's police force is virtually non-existent. Can't really even remember a single time where the police intervened. Even unsuccessfully. Hold on. Okay, I'm looking it up. And apparently out of like 144 episodes, Sunnydale PD shows up or is mentioned in exactly 4 of them. Yeah, okay. A character at one point says the police department is, quote, deeply stupid. Hell yeah, okay, ACAB. Hi, this is editing Andrew calling you to say that I was completely wrong about the police officers thing. So, just watching through seasons 2 and 3, there are plenty episodes where police show up or are mentioned. So, I have a list here just to prove how wrong I was. Season 2, episode 3, School Hard. Police officers, I believe, were mentioned or were there. Season 2, episode 8, Dark Age. A detective shows up and arrests someone, I believe. Season 2, episode 9 and 10 is a career fair and law enforcement show up. Season 2, episode 11, Ted, there are detectives and police, and there's a police station, and there are arrests. Season 2, episode 17, Passion, there are blinking police lights that are seen in the distance, and let's see here. Season 2, episode 19, there are police officers, there are ambulances, there's the police department. In Becoming Part 1, Buffy is literally arrested for a crime that she didn't commit. Season 3, episode 6, Band Candy, cops regress into teenagers, so we witnessed that. Season 3, episode 8, Lover's Wall, cops are briefly mentioned having to cover up one of another person's murders in a magic shop. Season 3, episode 14, Bad Girls, cops actually tried to arrest Buffy and Faith, and they're in a cop car, and things happen. But oh my god. Season 3, episode 15, Consequences, the police interrogate Buffy at her house about a murder that takes place. And season 3, episode 19, Choices, Snyder and the police ambush a trade that's happening in the school at night. I know it wasn't super necessary for me to mention all that stuff, but I just thought it was just like, oh my god, how wrong could I be? But you know what? I stand by that statement. ACAB, they're all idiots. They're all really, really stupid. Anyway, Buffy is super ticked off about this, and rightfully so. The only person she can consult about this body and being a slayer is Giles. Here's the part where we learn who Giles is, which is her watcher, aka some guy elected by this historical British council with heavy Tory vibes to watch over the Slayer, train her, whip her into shape, etc., etc. More importantly, we get probably the first distinct monologue from Buffy about being a normal teenage girl.
I was afraid of this.
Well, I wasn't. It's my first day. I was afraid that I was going to be behind in all my classes, that I wouldn't make any friends, that I would have last month's hair. I didn't think there'd be vampires on campus, and I don't care.
And why are you here?
To tell you that I don't care.
Love that. Good for her. Giles is very timid at this point, or actually I'd say he's just very thrown off by Buffy's demeanor as the Slayer. He doesn't understand how teenagers speak or think or act the way they do, and he doesn't get why Buffy isn't ready to kick ass and give up her entire personal life for slayage. The thing about Giles, if we're really going to get into him now, is he's at a crossroads. He's very posh and by the books, he's very traditional in that way, and expects his relationship with the Slayer to be professional and distant, so part of him is really stern. But then you have Buffy waltzing in and challenging the entire status quo by being a sassy 16-year-old. So early seasons Giles is really just trying to figure out how to be an authority figure to the Slayer figure, while also trying to detangle the often chaotic and unpredictable mind of a girl who just wants to go to a house party, or go on a date with a boy, or watch Indian soap operas with her friends. So, spoiler alert, as Buffy and Giles get closer to one another, Giles eventually becomes her father figure in a way. Well, exactly that, actually. I wanted to say but I don't think that's accurate because Buffy does have a father who shows up in like 2 episodes, but for all intents and purposes, Giles is the one who she has to look up to for guidance. And Giles is the one who must be both a strict authority and emotional rock. He's very bad at the second thing at first and doesn't set out to inhabit that role, but it happens inevitably. 2 important points of this scene. One, Giles postulates that Sunnydale must be the center of mystical energy, which is very correct. And 2, Xander, of all people, is hidden in the back of the scene behind some bookshelves. He hears everything Buffy and Giles say regarding vampires and slaying, etc., but he doesn't believe it. I'm gonna go a bit faster here because this is when we get a scene of a random vampire dude praying in a cave, talking about how the, quote, sleep will wake and the world will end. Very spooky, very big stuff. The next scene with this dude is great because it turns out we meet the big bad in the very first episode. His name is the Master. I guess it's because of half season, I don't know. I feel like they would usually like hold off for a bit. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually really like the Master. Like, I don't like the Master, but if you take into account every big bad that the Scooby Gang encounters over 7 seasons, the Master, by virtue of being the first, is really just this transparently written catalyst of a bad guy whose sole purpose is to unite the Scooby Gang against a common enemy, and that is it. The role and plot are really played straight on his part for what it's worth, but come on, just look at him. Look at his dead eyes and his weird Kool-Aid mouth and try to tell me that this man has a deep, complex personality. Because you can't. He is the Buffy equivalent of Nosferatu, except the SpongeBob version of Nosferatu, where he just flicks the lights on and off. He says his lines in a funny accent, he gives Buffy the opportunity for a few cool one-liners, and boom, he's gone by the end of episode 12. Continuing forward, Buffy has been invited out to the Bronze that evening by Cordelia, because they still like each other at this point. And I love the Bronze, but like, what club lets underage kids in? I mean, don't get me wrong, I would love a place like the Bronze just to hang out, but I don't know who is checking those IDs, and if they even check those IDs. Buffy actually meets up with Willow and not Cordelia, and this is where we have that interesting foil I was talking about earlier. Willow tells Buffy about her inability to talk to boys, and Buffy encourages her to make her move. This is what I'm talking about with Willow when I say she's actually very brave despite the archetype she falls into, because as soon as Buffy steps away, girl is on the prowl. Turns out Buffy left Willow for a minute because she saw Giles watching her from afar in the club of all places, and they have this very intense little chat on the club's mezzanine. Giles tells her that she should be able to identify a vampire through the din of noise people, and then we get this little gem of a scene.
You have to hone your senses, focus until the energy washes over, until you feel every particle of.
There's one.
Where?
Right there, talking to that girl.
You don't know.
Oh, please.
Look at his jacket. He's got the sleeves rolled up. And the shirt? Deal with that outfit for a moment.
It's dated.
It's carbon dated.
It turns out that unfashionable vampire is talking to Willow, and then the vampire leads her out of the building. Fearing for Willow's safety, Buffy leaves Giles and attempts to pursue them. A funny thing about the following scene. So, you've seen this guy Jesse in a few shots, and I briefly mentioned him, but I'm not going to dive into him for a pretty good reason. He's talking with Darla, that girl from the beginning who ate that other dude. Yeah, turns out these 2 vampires are bringing sacrifices to the Master for something called the Harvest. The Master's too weak to escape like the cave he was resurrected in, and so they have to bring him like a bunch of sacrifices. It's very convoluted. So everyone I've talked about in depth so far, Buffy, Xander, Willow, and Giles, these are the integral members of the Scooby Gang. You can't have the Scooby Gang without them, but there are some very important tangential members that I'd like to go over. The first is Cordelia. You saw her at school being bitchy but fashionable, and it's around this time that Buffy finally reveals how weird she is. While she's tracking Willow and that vampire, she mistakes Cordelia for the bad guy, and we get this amazing line as Buffy jumps on her.
Cordelia! God! What is your childhood trauma?
I also really like this character. Cordelia really is a bitch, and a great thing about her character at this point is that she really doesn't reveal much of a soft side at all. She does have a soft side, and as she grows up and moves through Sunnydale and the rest of the Buffyverse, she gets a lot more complex, but these first few seasons have her navigating around the Scoobies in a really interesting, mean way. Because despite her harsh personality, she often has to coordinate with the Scooby Gang despite her best efforts. I think you could liken her to a Regina George before Regina George was even a thing, with that popular girl stereotype. And let's be honest, she doesn't stray too far from that role at the beginning, like Willow strays from the nerd archetype, but like, who wouldn't want to see Regina George stake a few vampires? It's camp. I'm calling it camp. I'm homosexual, I can say that, right? The other character is someone whose scene I actually just recently ignored, and that's right before Buffy arrives at the Brahms to hang out. Downtown Sunnydale, you'll realize when you watch the series, has like one singular, grimy, dark alleyway that they use as a set piece. Characters will walk dramatically down its center or engage in fantastically choreographed fight scenes. And they're all thrown against nearby trash cans, dumpsters. Sometimes they stand on the roof and look down. It's very dramatic. Buffy's walking down this alley when she realizes someone's tailing her, and bam! She ambushes him. Turns out this is Angel. We don't get a lot from him in the first episode, but he's hot. He's wearing this weird velvet black blazer, and he warns Buffy about the harvest, conveniently leaving the Master's name out of that conversation. We get to see more of him later in the series. He's very... David Boreanaz. All I'll say here is that he was the blueprint. He was the inspiration, at least in my mind, for Twilight, or Edward from Twilight. I love Twilight, don't get me wrong, and I will talk about it all day. But Edward did not invent the fancy little boyfriend updo. God, somehow I'm still talking about this pilot. Okay, let's make this fast, but like actually fast this time, as opposed to last time when I just kept talking at a regular pace. So Darla and the male vampire have each brought a victim back to this creepy mausoleum, but Darla, that harlot, already bit her victim, Jesse. She wasn't supposed to do that. He's not dead, he's still wandering around lightheaded, but he's been compromised. Buffy has left the Bronze and Giles behind and confidently strolls into the mausoleum to save her newfound friends. This is really the first scene where Buffy is able to reveal her quippy banter prowess.
Well, this is nice. It's a little bare, but a dash of paint, a few throw pillows. Call it home. Okay, first of all, what's with the outfit? Live in the now, okay? You look like DeBarge. Now, this is not going to be pretty. We're talking violence, strong language, adult content.
She kills the male vampire, Darla manages to escape, but then there's this third vampire who we saw earlier praying who comes upon the scene. Wham, bam, look at this. Oh, I love this last shot. Look, a freeze frame. Like, oh my God. I don't think they ever did that again in the series, but I wish they did. I feel like they definitely had very intentional camp sometimes, but I feel like they could have gone more down like the unintentional stuff. Anyway, that's the first episode. Okay, so where do we go from here? I already mentioned how the Master himself is basically just a conduit for all Buffy's friends to meet and get used to their crime-fighting dynamic together, so as I was watching this episode and all the other episodes from Season 1, I ultimately came to the conclusion that it's not necessary to cover the Master's entire rise and fall of power. I'm going to give you the basics. He does, in fact, lose his fight against Buffy. I mean, he gets irreparably vanquished in the process. But it's really how the writers provoke that world around the Master into action, both the good and the bad. That's what really matters. When he's later taunting Buffy in a one-on-one fight, it doesn't necessarily matter that he's this evil, ugly demon hell-bent on killing her, but rather his importance is that he represents something bigger than himself for Buffy. He's the embodied reminder that this teenage girl has a terrifying, mystical obligation she must face, that she must accept herself as the Slayer, and all the burdens of prophecy that come with it. Season 1 forces Buffy, in the most straightforward of ways, to understand that her life will never be normal. But instead of giving up that normal part of herself, Buffy carves out a corner where she is able to exist on both sides. As the Slayer, yes, but also as a friend, as a daughter, a student, a cheerleader even. Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a TV show isn't about the struggle of having to choose between two very different sides of life, but rather the active decision to live both of those worlds simultaneously. You can see the various powers who sway her life most obviously through Buffy's mother, Joyce Summers, who only wants her to be happy and be a normal teenage girl. And then there's Giles, who at first struggles to understand Buffy's compromise of lifestyles and often devalues those social and personal needs. This whole part of the topic really makes me want to talk about Faith, too, who is a character that we'll meet in season 2 and she gets developed more on later, but I'm forcibly telling myself to hold off until then. So, to jump back into where we are in the plot, you already saw in the freeze frame that Buffy's pilot episode was actually the first half of a two-parter, but I'm not going to go into nearly as much depth as last episode. To keep this brief, Buffy manages to save herself and rescue all of her friends from that mausoleum and the Master's posse, except, notably, Jesse. The Master in his little cave decides that Jesse will no longer serve as a sacrifice, but instead he has been upgraded to the role of bait, so the vampires can lure in the Slayer and, kill her. The Scooby Gang figures out how the vampires are getting around, which is through Sunnydale's sewer system, and Buffy goes back to save Jesse. Oh, and Xander follows her without her knowing because he cares for Jesse, but the way it's written, it really just feels like he can't trust Buffy to do her job as a woman, I guess. Unfortunately, they do find Jesse, and he starts leading them back out, quote unquote, but it turns out that all the biting Darla did on him, all the snacking, actually turned him into a vampire. So he tries to kill them in this weird boiler room, but Xander and Buffy manage to escape through some air vents. Meanwhile, Giles and Willow have gained intel on why the hell this entire thing is happening. Turns out, and this is important, the entirety of Sunnydale sits on top of what is called the Hellmouth, which Giles describes to be a portal between this reality and the next. And the Master is seeking to open the Hellmouth so he can, roam the world and do bad guy stuff. The Hellmouth is ultimately very pivotal to the series because it's always under constant threat of being opened by a bad guy or two. But more importantly than that, lore-wise, the Hellmouth isn't simply this mystical portal. It's also, in large part, the sole reason why so many supernatural creatures converge upon or arise in Sunnydale episode after episode. Most of the weekly creatures don't even mention or know about the Hellmouth, but it gives reason to how, for example, a Sunnydale student who has no friends in one episode can magically become invisible, or why a kid in a coma can turn the entire town into a literal nightmare hellscape because of his repressed traumas. It can also be the vague reason for how Buffy ended up in Sunnydale, as opposed to a very normal, calm town somewhere else. Moving forward, Giles is able to deduce that the Master's harvest can only happen one night in a century, and that happens to be tonight. I mention this specifically because episode 2 gives us a very important distinction between Giles' type of smarts and Willow's. Giles, of course, has a massive index of supernatural texts, untranslated prophecies, and is himself an encyclopedia on vampires and other evil life forms. Meanwhile, Willow, earlier in the episode, we saw her gain access to Sunnydale's city plans, to which she explains her research in this way.
So, all the city plans are just open to the public?
Well, in a way. I sort of stumbled onto them when I accidentally decrypted the city council's security system.
I think that explains their differences pretty well. The Scooby Gang determines the only place the harvest can happen that night is at the Bronze, because that's the only place anybody ever shows up in groups, and they go to put an end to it. There's this vampire again, the freeze frame guy. Buffy only escaped him the first time and didn't kill him, and turns out the way the Master plans to escape the Hellmouth is by making this other dude his vessel who he can feed through.
My blood is your blood. My soul is your soul.
My body is your instrument.
Which kind of sounds gay, but I'm not going to get into the gay stuff. Contrary to every other vampire media in the 90s and early aughts, Buffy's vampires are nearly absent of homoeroticism, with a few notable exceptions, which I might cover later. Anyway, Buffy ends up fighting these dudes, saves Cordelia from getting fed on, and kills the vessel, ruining the Master's harvest. Darla does escape alive. I love this part.
Get off of it!
And then, oops. Yeah, Xander kills Vampire Jesse. I wanted to have a whole section dedicated to Jesse as a psych out, but I ultimately cut it because it was pointless on my end, which I find funny because apparently behind the scenes, Joss Whedon also wanted Jesse to be a psych out character. Apparently there were plans made to have Jesse's actor, Eric Balfour, briefly featured in the show's opening theme as a main character, but apparently they didn't have the budget quite yet, which makes sense. The show redeems itself on this front way later in the series, which I can commend in practice, but not for the actual character that was involved. If you've ever watched the show, you know how I feel. You probably feel the same way. And if you don't, you're a psychopath, I'm sorry. That's the end of that episode. Also, when I was watching this episode, they actually talk about the police when Buffy asks if the Scoobies should call about this whole debacle, but Buffy immediately turns that down. I think that's all I really wanted to talk about in terms of this episode. So, for keeping track, Darla is still alive, the Master is still stuck in his little cave, and Angel is stalking around. I didn't mention him because he's being very mysterious and therefore he's being very useless.
You may, in fact, stand between the Earth and its total destruction.
Well, I gotta look on the bright side. Maybe I can still get kicked out of school.
So not to brag or anything, but I actually have all 7 seasons of Buffy on DVD, and each season has a little pamphlet on the inside that I want to read from for the extra episodes that aren't really, like, plot heavy or plot important. They're structured like poems, and honestly, I feel like the writer who put this together had a field day that day. Like, I would love this job. I'm gonna put, like, similar versions on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So yes, I'm skipping all of the important plot-heavy episodes for now. I'm gonna come back to them later, but there's not a lot. So starting with episode 3, Witch. In an effort to inject some normalcy into her life, Buffy tries out for the cheerleading squad, only to discover the competition wants her dead. Yeah, so this episode follows Buffy as she tries and fails to make the cheerleading team. Through a series of unpredictable events, popular girls are then forced off the team thanks to magical meddling and witchcraft. One talented girl right at the beginning is set on fire during the tryouts. Another girl literally has her mouth disappear off of her face, and Cordelia at one point in the episode goes blind, and yet continues to do her driving test because she is Cordelia. It turns out the girl who made second alternate, Amy, was possessed by her evil mom and is cursing all these girls so that Amy, or Mom Amy, can join the team and live out her glory days in high school as head cheerleader. It's high concept when you talk about it all in one sentence like that. The only actually relevant thing to come out of this episode is Amy herself, not Mom Amy. Usually tertiary characters never show up after the episode where they're featured, and that makes sense because they're useless. But Amy will randomly pop up from season to season, or every other season, which is a nice break from the rules. She even becomes a little bit important to the plot for like a bit. Notably, this is the first time Giles gets knocked out in the series. It's during the final climax when they're fighting the mom person. Yeah. Moving on to episode 4, titled Teacher's Pet. Xander falls for a beautiful substitute teacher who is actually a she-mantis intent on mating with, then decapitating virginal boys. If you hear me pausing after each line, it's because I'm trying to read this as poetry in my head and I know it's not. But yeah, I don't think there's any better way to describe the episode than what they put. While I was watching this episode, I didn't actually take any notes because, big surprise, Buffy kills a she-mantis. The big joke in this episode is that Xander is a virgin, and isn't that funny? Because haha, virgins. I'm skipping an episode now and moving on to episode 6, The Pack. A field trip to the zoo turns deadly after Xander and a clique of mean-spirited kids become possessed by the spirit of a demonic breed of hyena. I didn't know that the plural of hyena was hyena, but you learn something every day. The only thing of note in this episode is that Principal Flutie, who I haven't actually talked about, dies. It's kind of sad. Flutie at least tried to understand Buffy when she transferred to Sunnydale and tried to look past her bad track record. He didn't because it was always in the back of his head for those 5 episodes. But it's sad. But I get why they replaced him, because he didn't really add any special conflict, unlike the principal who replaces him. Also, Giles gets knocked out this episode when the Scooby Gang faces the evil zookeeper. Dramatic, dramatic. Episode 8, I, Robot You, Jane. Willow unwillingly unleashes a powerful demon named Moloch onto the internet, where he turns Sunnydale's computer crowd into his helpless pawns. This is the episode where Jenny Calendar is introduced. I actually think she's a great secondary character, and I love her personality and what she contributes. She is the computer science teacher, and I would say that she's Giles' foil in a lot of ways, but I'll go into her with more depth when we talk about episode 7, Angel. This episode's great because it's Buffy's version of an after-school special about internet stranger danger, except the internet stranger danger is it's a horrible demon killing students. It's a fun time capsule in retrospect, and I recommend watching it even if you don't know anything else about the series. There's like this one part where the possessed students are just saying, I'm jacked in. I'm jacked in. Episode 9, The Puppet Show. Buffy suspects that a ventriloquist's dummy may be harvesting organs from classmates performing in a school talent show. I really don't like talking about this episode, which sucks, because when you remove the stupid puppet that's part of it, the rest of the script and the conceit itself is great. A mysterious demon is killing students in a talent show, and Buffy and her friends have to figure out which performer is the bad guy. I personally love a good mystery. What sucks is that this puppet is a massive red herring of a suspect who takes up an absurd amount of the episode's focus. He has way too much meaningless, pervy dialogue. Sorry for pointing at you. The justification for him being a puppet is convoluted, and there are entire story beats dedicated to the puppet that ultimately serve as time killer. As the viewer, you're led to believe he is the bad guy that's harvesting organs, which would make all of this focus justified in the end, but he isn't. And when you learn he isn't, you realize he's this entirely useless, superfluous part of the plot whose only purpose was to distract you in a very gimmicky way. His connection to the demon at large is loose at best, and it's blandly described through dialogue. So, as a viewer, I feel like my time has been wasted. It doesn't help that his perverted dialogue is aimed mainly towards kids, including Buffy, who's only 16 years old at this time. If this was funny back in the day, in like the 1990s, I'm glad that we as a society have like moved on from that, and if you haven't, then you need to get with the times. Episode 10 is Nightmares, the nightmare world of a comatose child sends Buffy and her friends into a realm where their worst nightmares become reality. While I was watching this episode, I was trying to decide if I wanted to discuss this one with the other plot-heavy episodes, but I decided against it, mostly because the Master's part is like a really brief cameo. He like clacks his fingers together at the start of the episode, foretelling chaotic energies afoot in Sunnydale, but that's about it. What is fun about this episode is it portrays some of the most innate fears of the main cast. With Xander, Willow, and Cordy, we're mainly privy to very superficial fears, like stage fright and clowns, which is fun, but most of the heavyweight fears that the episode explores naturally come from Buffy and Giles. This episode gets a lot of praise for the character work, and I agree with that. I think this episode is actually really exciting, but I also get the sense that an episode like this would look entirely different if the writers push it off to a later season, even season 2. There are legitimate existential fears that Willow and Xander face, for example, and I think they could have explored them pretty well, but I understand when it comes to a subject like our innermost nightmares, there needs to be a balance of heft and levity. I think the strongest concepts explored here, of course, come from Buffy. This is one of the few episodes of the entire series that we actually get to meet and see her dad. Buffy is fearful that she was the cause of her parents' divorce, and in the process of confronting that fear when it comes to life, Buffy talks with a fictional dream version of her dad, who scathingly places all of the blame of the divorce right on her. It's not merely that Buffy believes she is the cause of the divorce, it's bigger than that. Buffy believes that she is the chaotic figure who is a burden to the people she cares for, that she only brings discord and chaos because of who she is as the Slayer. Whenever there are real-life scenes with Joyce, Buffy's mother, there is the underlying theme that Buffy must do well so she doesn't cause stress on her, or worry, or resentment. She wants to be the teenage girl, and she wants her mom to have a normal life. Episode 11, Out of Mind, Out of Sight, as Cordelia prepares for Sunnydale High's Maid Queen competition, an invisible force starts attacking her closest friends. This is the last Monster of the Week episode of season 1, but it's also a really pivotal one because it's Cordelia-centric. As the last member of the main cast and the only one besides Angel to be circling outside of the central Scooby Gang, Cordelia really needs some focus to complicate her character beyond the basic mean girl. I won't really dive into the Monster of the Week for this episode, but a large theme that plays throughout is popularity, but also the inverse, to be lonely and loneliness. At one point in the episode, Buffy is talking with Cordelia one-on-one, and they gravitate in conversation towards these themes. In all honesty, I think the entire conceit of this episode was a vehicle for this very pivotal piece of dialogue. I'm just going to read it myself. So Cordelia says, "You think I'm never lonely because I'm so cute and popular. I can be surrounded by people and be completely alone. It's not like any of them really know me. I don't even know if they like me half the time. People just want to be in the popular zone. Sometimes when I talk, everyone's so busy agreeing with me, they don't hear a word I say." To which Buffy responds, "Well, if you feel so alone, why do you work so hard at being popular?" And Cordelia responds with this, "Well, it beats being alone all by yourself." And I think I can leave it there, because it speaks for itself. It's a really strong episode, I think. Also, this episode confirms that the government is aware of supernatural phenomena, which is funny because it comes back around for season 4, but they don't make the connection between this episode and that. It's a very missed opportunity. Those are all the fun, non-plot heavy episodes from season 1. I did leave out a lot of information while going over this stuff, which I admit, but at this point I'm trying to challenge myself with how well I can condense material down without losing a season's narrative. So as we move on to new seasons later on, you're probably going to see me try different ideas out with mixed success. It's all trial and error at this point because it is my first video, so I hope you can cut me some slack. You may also have noticed after I finished talking about episode 1, my outfit and the lighting has changed again, and that's because I spent a lot of time between this recording and the last taking notes and watching more of season 1. And I found myself with the interesting challenge of practicing liberal, wholesale trimming of story content. It's funny because if you know where I've been in the past 2 years, you know I've been teaching introductory English to college freshmen, and a large part of the lectures that I put together involve the ongoing practice of summarization. And learning how to summarize without sounding dismissive or reductive is more challenging when the focus of your writing becomes heftier or bloated, really, in the sense that minutia is constant, and mapping out the important story beats without the excess is a continuous and sometimes arduous process. So if it seems like I'm being dismissive about certain plot beats, then I welcome commentary and feedback because I'm still very green to the process of creating internet content, and right now, I don't mind the help. I did want to talk about the more story-driven episodes with more depth, and that means I'm going back to episode 5, which I skipped over. This episode's titled Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, and this is the first pivotal episode where Buffy must navigate her two worlds in real time, being a regular teenager and a vampire slayer. To briefly touch on overall story beats, there are a few pieces of the puzzle that I will identify now. The Master gains an ally through the Anointed One, who is allegedly the Master's greatest warrior. Quote, "The Slayer will not know him, will not stop him, and he will lead her into hell." The larger conceit of the plot is that Buffy and the Scooby Gang must stop the Anointed One from rising, but Buffy is in conflict because she has a date with a cute boy on the same night as a few ritual sacrifices are meant to take place. The great dramatic irony of this episode is that the vampire they believe is the Anointed One is actually just a complete red herring, so the Master ends up gaining a new ally at the end of the episode, while the Scooby Gang believe they've beaten him at his own game again. It really sucks because the guy she's supposed to go on a date with is admittedly someone that I would probably find to be very dreamy in high school.
But you don't seem bookwormy. The type of person to lock themselves in a dark room with a lot of musty old books.
His name is Owen, and he's just a throwaway tertiary character as per usual. I don't know, he likes poetry and he's always super quiet and brooding, and I feel like I would have gravitated towards that so fast. It turns out in the hijinks of trying to break off a date with him to defeat the fake Anointed One, he ends up following her to the confrontation and gets caught up in the middle. At one point, Buffy wrongly believes that a vampire has killed him, hence the title of the episode. Also, Giles does get knocked out during the big fight scene. The devastation of this episode isn't that he realizes she's some kick-ass girl who fights bad guys, it's the fact that he's completely enthralled with that side of Buffy and wants to become like an adrenaline junkie with her. This turn of events is revealed after the episode's conflict has wrapped up, and it's here that Buffy realizes that having a normal love life isn't an easy or responsible task as the vampire slayer. She ends up turning Owen down despite her growing like for him, and when talking about it with Giles, she describes her reasoning to be that she's protecting him, which makes sense because right now, he's still a completely optional part of her life that she can protect by staying away from, unlike her friends who have inextricably woven themselves into the complicated world of vampire slayers.
You, Xander, Willow, you guys know the score. You're careful. 2 days in my world and no one really would get himself killed.
This is the turning point where Buffy truly realizes she must sacrifice living life the way she wants to for the safety of the world around her. It's the first time I think the audience also gets a fully realized understanding of what it's like to require solitude as a prophetic, super powerful young girl. There were conversations about it beforehand, but only now can we really see these ramifications played out through Owen's false death scene. On the other hand, it also forces the audience to understand just how different Buffy truly is to every other Slayer in history. A lifetime of solitude isn't merely a suggestion, but also a spoken rule of the job when we receive backstory on the lineage of the other Slayers later on. If you've seen the series, I'm talking about the various trippy dream sequences where Buffy encounters the first Slayer, and other historical Slayers are explored or described. More on that, there comes a time when we learn of and meet other Slayers alive and kicking in the Buffyverse, and it's here that the contrast of Buffy's lifestyle actualizes her as an anomaly in history. Funnily enough, this diverse lifestyle is also what keeps her both sane and alive. Having a support system, much like being a human being, is what keeps Buffy grounded. What you doing here? So, you see what I mean when I say the Master really is only a catalyst? Ultimately, the Anointed One is a mere motivator to Buffy to grow and understand herself more as a person, as an individual separated from the enviable ignorant. This catalyst theme continues when we near the end of Season 1, and the Master's storyline wraps up completely. Skipping ahead a bit, Episode 7 is titled Angel, so naturally, the entire episode is focused exclusively on unwrapping the mystery that is this brooding, pre-Edwardian vampire boy. Skipping right to a big reveal in the episode, and I already spoiled it earlier, Angel is revealed to be a vampire. Through a series of hilarious hijinks set up by Darla and company, Angel and Buffy are forced to confront each other as opposites on the spectrum of good and evil. Vampires, as Buffy and the Scooby Gang understand them to be, are uniformly evil, mere facsimiles of humans by appearance and nothing more.
A vampire isn't a person at all. It may have the movements, the memories, even the personality of the person that it took over, but it's still a demon at the core. There is no halfway.
Buffy actually learns of Angel's vampirism after sharing their first kiss. So naturally, when the idea is posed that she must kill him, as ordained by her job description, she's hesitant. He's always been kind to her, if a little bit aloof. Mysterious, more than anything else, but occasionally helpful and, very importantly, super hunky. Meanwhile, Angel is confronted by Darla, but it's not really a fight. It's more like she's taunting him for living above the surface, interacting with humanity, and drinking out of blood bags stolen from a hospital. It turns out that Darla and Angel have a long and storied past. Darla, it's revealed, was the vampire that actually turned Angel in the first place. She taunts Angel and says that he should tell Buffy about the curse. As we learn through Giles, Angel is actually the current version of Angelus, a 240-year-old vampire who is especially vicious and deadly throughout Europe before moving to America, after which he basically disappeared off the face of the planet with no recorded hunting patterns or victims. Because Darla is a conniving little vampire, she gets into the Summers household and very lightly feeds on Buffy's mom. Through perfect timing, she throws Joyce's body into Angel's awaiting arms and disappears. Thereafter, Buffy shows up on the scene, and when she sees him, she understandably thinks he's been feeding and that he's evil. More dramatic irony ensues. Buffy prepares for maximum slayage, and Angel goes off to brood some more. When they have their final confrontation, we learn the important details of Angel's past. It turns out that Angel, while he was evil and vicious, once fed on and killed a Romani girl.
What changed?
Fed on a girl about your age. Beautiful. Dumb as a post. But a favorite among her clan.
Her clan?
The Romani.
I know. What follows is that the Romani people then curse Angel with a soul so he may suffer in remembering the horrific, ungodly crimes that he committed for all of eternity. Just to pause, I think it's obvious when I say that this feature of Angel's backstory is really irresponsible and reprehensible. I agree with the criticism wholeheartedly, but to sit here and unfailingly run through the dialogue which explains why this depiction is harmful would be, frankly, very old news. There are better authorities on the subject than myself. What I will say is typically when a group of critically minded modern people return their gaze to an older media, their writing or logic is often riddled with the asterisk which states this TV show or book was a product of its time, and can we really criticize it to its fullest extent? It's a practice I think that a lot of people embrace, including myself, when they encounter really bad social or political perspectives, and prior to really applying that to reality, I embrace it as good practice. But when you look at any singular example of poor or unfair depiction in media, such as Buffy with the Romani people, you realize that the asterisk can't feasibly apply, especially knowing that Buffy the Vampire Slayer exists as this flagship piece of syndicated media. It becomes obvious that no harmful portrayal exists in a vacuum, and it can't be excused from judgment. There are obvious ramifications through the understanding that Buffy set a precedent, or at least perpetuated the precedent, that the Romani people are a one-dimensional, thieving, dishonest minority, and it's only recently that this shitty trope is seeing less use. And it's not that this criticism has only just come out of the woodwork, but rather that this magical thing called the internet conveniently disseminated critical thought to a wider platform of people. Buffy was never absolved of criticism, even when it was originally airing. From a superficial search, a fair few pieces of criticism I found were published around 2008 or 2009. Nicolina Dobreva, in their 2009 dissertation, describes Buffy to be deserving of criticism for portraying the Roma as primitive and, quote, irrevocably foreign. Meanwhile, Katie McLean, in their 2008 article, Representation of the Roma in Buffy and Angel, observes the Buffyverse to depict the Roma as a vengeful, punishing people tied to magic and the occult. I did find this one brief news piece from 1998 about pushback from Romani critics, but the language seems a bit insensitive, so I'll just put it on the screen now. I will say that despite the criticism against Buffy's depiction of the Roma, a lot of people actually find the minority's primary representative, Jenny Calendar, to be a pretty solid character. And I have to agree, I really love Jenny. She is Sunnydale's computer science teacher, like I said, and immediately upon entering the show, she and Giles spark up this interesting rivalry between them. Giles, being Giles, is really stuffy and technology-averse, preferring to stick to the ancient texts and old scriptures. In that way, he's very traditional and very stuck in his old ways. Meanwhile, Jenny, who describes herself to be... Fuck you! Meanwhile, Jenny, who describes herself to be a techno-pagan, is this confident, self-possessed woman who embraces the new age of technology, and even goes so far as to challenge the gatekeeping of knowledge by pompous white men, which is very popular commentary in today's day and age. The next couple sources that I use do use the G slur, but I'm not going to say it just to cover my bases. So when that word comes up, I'm just going to use the word G. So reading from Exploring the Contemporary Relevance of G Stereotypes in the Buffyverse, Juliana Beaudoin, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says this: Yet Whedon and his writers ended up creating a dynamic and multifaceted Romani character, Ginny Calendar, who, despite reinforcing certain G myths, overall defies stereotype and contributed to a positive Romani portrayal. Similarly, going back to Dobreva, they write that Ginny's character, despite the reversion of a few stereotypes, is arguably one of the most multifaceted and positive representations of a female G in the past 20 years. I love how I was like, I'm not going to talk about this subject, and then I did. To get back on track, this whole episode was about Angel, right? So, yeah, the Roma cursed him to have a soul, and now he walks the earth as a suffering man, grieving from his many sins, up until he starts romantically stalking Buffy Summers. Returning to the episode, they have their conflict where Buffy nearly kills him, but luckily Angel is able to explain the many nuances of his brooding existence, so she lets him off. Oh, but that's not all, because Darla shows up with 2 fucking guns. Holy shit. Like, way to raise the stakes, girl. Unfortunately, to further solidify Angel's departure from his old evil ways, he symbolically kills Darla, the woman who originally turned him. Yada yada, the Master's pissed, and the Scooby Gang wins out for this episode. I think I spent more time talking about Ginny Calendar than I did Angel, but I don't think anybody cares. He is the prototypical vampire boyfriend, so you already know everything you need to know about his personality. Moving on to episode 12, in the finale of season 1, Buffy and the rest of the Scooby Gang must face the everlasting trouble of prophecy, of fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. This is a big episode for Buffy, yes, obviously, but I'll also say that this is a huge episode for Xander, too. The trouble I've noticed with older shows, aka shows that aired before the era of online streaming, is that it's difficult to sprinkle pivotal story beats from episode to episode. Not every viewer can watch every episode as it first airs or when it first reruns, so it makes sense for the writers to pack a lot of important character beats into a flagship episode like the finale or a season premiere. I think after Buffy solidifies its place in pop culture and popularity, it's definitely able to avoid those writing pitfalls, but I'd argue that season 1 Xander suffers from that type of writing. He's pining after Buffy from the first moment that he sees her, and it's only in episode 12 that we have him finally make a move. It's really refreshing, I'll admit, because for characters like Xander, and not only Xander, this type of unreciprocated, geeky pining often lasts for an entire series, and then the character is just uselessly piddling around in the meantime. Nobody likes that, but Xander actually shoots his shot by asking Buffy to the school dance. Unfortunately, it's a total bust, and Buffy plainly explains to him that she doesn't like him that way, but she does value him as a friend. So at least he tried, right? Xander struggles with the denial and mopes around for a while, listening to sad country music, and for a brief second he's giving, like, incel vibes, but it mostly reads as reactionary and temporary. Of course, this episode largely focuses around Buffy's relationship with Fate and Judy, but Xander's arc feels like an underrated aspect of this plot. In the climax of the episode, when Buffy really needs him, he saves her life despite the negative feelings he previously felt. He makes the active decision to no longer wallow uselessly in the friend zone, instead actually and actively picking up the mantle as a close friend. It is the appropriate normal thing to do, of course, to want to save your friend, but it's still a transformative moment that I like. Buffy's arc, I think, can be best summed up by the visual presented at the climax of the episode. She is facing off against the Master, yes, but she's doing it in her prom dress. When a fatal prophecy falls on the same night as the school dance, Buffy of course struggles throughout the episode, thinking about her oncoming death and responsibility and her mystical fate, only wanting to deny that supernatural world and return to her normal life. But instead of simply running away, Buffy comes to understand that there's no one else but her who can face off against the vampires and other forces of evil, that it must be her. In the end, she doesn't compromise her personal life or goals in the process either, which is what the Slayer is traditionally forced to decide. Instead, she actively chooses to represent herself as both the Slayer and as the normal girl, finding power in humanity and friendship and a sense of normalcy. These worlds are symbolically, visually combined. In fact, if it weren't for her friends or her innate desire to stay true to herself, she would be dead. The Master, near the end of the episode, actually kills her and disposes of her in a puddle. And it's only through Xander's help and care for her that she survives. He gives her CPR, and after recovering, she's able to fight the Master a second time, and this time she kicks his ass. Other notes about this episode, it's learned that the center of the Hellmouth is situated directly under the school's library, which causes some fun hijinks near the climax with the Master, and I would put an asterisk on Buffy's death, because that has an interesting domino effect down the line. And that's season 1. That took a lot longer than I thought, but I had a fun time. Moving on to season 2, I'm not going to review every episode, so things are going to move much faster. The characters and stakes are set up now. I've done my job, so now I'm just going to focus on the fun stuff. I'm probably going to make another cut here, so the next time you'll see me, I'll look different yet again. I'm probably going to have better technology, or, fingers crossed I do, so hopefully this screen and my audio sounds a little bit better. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with the new tech. So a few things have obviously changed since you last saw me. Clearly, I am in a different part of my room. Among the changes, I have a new camera, I have a new desk, I'm not sitting on the floor anymore, and I have this cute little microphone over here. I'd move it, but you know what, I'll move it, why not? It's so cute. I was considering keeping the background the same, but I figured why pretend like I didn't get new stuff. So yeah, I'm happy to say that I have a better setup for you guys. I almost refilmed the entire thing just because like, ooh, new stuff, but I could not fathom the idea of saying everything I've already said twice, so you'll just have to deal with the change. And lastly, because I have the new microphone, I'm going to try and keep it to a minimum, but you might catch my Mac making a lot of noises from the fan, so I'll try and edit that out whenever possible. You would think with the amount of changes I made since the last recording that it's been like a month, but no, it's actually only been like 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks and a half. For season 1, it took me like 3 weeks to watch just 12 episodes and write a script and record it. But I decided to be a bit more serious this time around, a bit more gung-ho. On my own time, I've been watching the 22 episodes of Buffy season 2 over the course of a week, 4 episodes a day and 2 episodes on the last day. Honestly, I don't even know how people really binge TV shows. Like I enjoy taking my time. When I get into a TV show, I usually deliberately space out the episodes to watch like 1 or 2 a day, so I don't run out anytime soon. But with Buffy, I already know the plot, plus there's like a butt ton of content to just consume overall, so I was okay with watching it episode after episode, not catching every single detail. Oh, and I totally forgot, I wasn't even gonna film today, but today's my birthday, it's January 11th. Anyway, all of that is to say that I've taken a lot of notes, I've reviewed the various plots and relationships going on, and I wanted to take a slightly different approach than what I did with season 1. Instead of just summarizing the content, I wanted to order my biggest observations through a convenient numbered list. And the first thing I have to say is this season is about love. You literally cannot avoid it as you watch the episodes. In every plot, every subplot, and nearly every monster of the week, there is some element of romance that plays into it, whether passion and lust is the reason a monster exists, or there is an undercurrent of love when it comes to someone in the main Scooby Gang, which it is prevalent. And believe me when I say, legitimately every character in the main cast links up or will link up with someone else in the main cast. And if not with each other, then they've outsourced the romance to a secondary character. And I like those secondary characters. There are a couple of those, and I'll introduce them when we get to their episodes. So the first part of this list is reviewing the main couples of the season, and naturally I'm going to divulge a lot of the plot developments and explain a lot of the character beats as I go along. So, number 1, Spike and Drusilla. These two are ostensibly the big bads of season 2. When they're introduced in episode 3, School Hard, they are treated with the same type of gravitas and plot relevance that the Master received, except this time it's elevated because they aren't as simple in concept or as transparently designed to unify the Scooby Gang as one. On the matter of Spike and Drusilla, I want to skip the first 2 episodes of the season because they're not too relevant in the grand scheme of things. I want to move right into talking about School Hard, because the very first shot you see of these two entering Sunnydale is as they're barreling through the welcome sign in their vehicle. And it's a great visual. They make callbacks later to it in the series, and it's a really good bit. Sorry, I'm just freaked out. There's a guy literally right outside my window, and I'm on the 2nd floor. I think he's fixing something, I don't know. I live in an apartment complex. As a funny side note, the Anointed One, that kid vampire from last season, is still alive and trying to create an army to fight and kill the Slayer, but Spike immediately runs amok over their entire scheme and seizes control of their operation very cavalierly, very easily. As they're introducing themselves to these low-life vampires, the audience is made to understand that they have a solid motivation for arriving at Sunnydale, but I will say the backstory is left a little bit ambiguous. Drusilla has apparently been wounded or made ill recently. The most concise explanation we get for this is that they were run out of Prague by a mob and she got injured along the way. The fun thing about these two vampires is that they are in love. Drusilla is quite literally this crazed, deranged, and very importantly, psychic vampire. And Spike
Drusilla.
Spike is just so handsome. I mean, that's not his personality. Spike is very devil-may-care and very violent. He has this bleach blonde hair and black nails and like a scar running through his eyebrow. I'm happy to admit that I immediately found him very attractive from the moment I first saw him, and I continue to think he's very attractive to this day. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm like a little bit brainwashed. Maybe I'm a little bit spike-pilled, but I don't know. I drew for the guy. If at any point you're not happy with me describing my attraction to all of these men from the turn of the century, I don't think this is the right video for you. Anyway, I guess with Sunnydale being the Hellmouth, sitting on or living within its energies can have a restorative effect for injured baddies. It's not exactly going to heal Drusilla to be there, but at the very least, the Hellmouth can sustain her. As a side note, her being injured has nothing to do with her being absolutely out of her mind. She's just like that. And healing her doesn't involve her brain. I'll get to why she's the way she is a little bit later. My guess is that in this episode, the writing team wasn't exactly sure what Spike and Drusilla were planning, but it somehow had to do with killing the Slayer so Drusilla can heal. Later in episode 6, Spike says to Drew that once he kills her, she can have her run a Sunnydale and get strong again. So it's not exactly a ritual as far as the plot is concerned, more so a desire to create a power vacuum and let Drusilla fill it. Also funny, in episode 3, School Hard, Spike goes out of his way to introduce himself to Buffy in that alleyway outside the Bronze. Yeah, I know. So, I actually want to talk about this episode in depth because I do really enjoy its premise and the way it plays out on the screen. On the Scooby Gang side of things, Buffy has been forcefully enlisted by the new principal, Principal Snyder, to set up the decorations and snacks for a parent-teacher night at the school. Principal Snyder, as a side note, is a really awful man who unfairly loathes Buffy, and anytime he shows up, he'll drone on about how he hates high school and high schoolers. His goal from the moment he replaces Flutie is to screw over Buffy, to get her expelled, to, like, delete her from existence, if at all possible. At this juncture, Snyder actually threatens Buffy with expulsion if she doesn't help out, and that happens a lot. So of course she's forced to. And because Buffy is a show about the normal world and the supernatural world colliding, Spike's ambush and conflict with the Slayer happens exactly on parent-teacher night. I say I really enjoy this episode because when his gang of vampires attacks the school, they bar all the doors and windows, so the building is on lockdown. This makes the episode feel very insular, very present rather than stretched out over a couple of days. Anyway, all the lights turn off, and because the vampires are incompetent, all of the main cast members escape into the school and hide in various rooms, boarding the doors. The setup becomes very much like a game of chess because the vampires have this brutish strength and kill any student or person they find, and Buffy must travel through the rafters of the school, gaining insight, weaponry, spreading messages wherever she can. Oh, and Buffy's mom, Joyce, is there. A large focus of this episode is that Joyce talks with Principal Snyder, and she's very disappointed with what she hears. Which is to say, through Snyder's eyes, Buffy has returned to her old violent ways, you know, like when she burnt down her last school's gymnasium. But what Joyce sees in this episode isn't that Buffy is just some violent nuisance of a girl, but rather she realizes she's raised someone very emotionally strong. There's this quote from Joyce at the end of the episode.
I have a daughter who can take care of herself, who's brave and resourceful and thinks of others in a crisis. No matter who you hang out with or what dumb teenage stuff you think you need to do. I'm gonna sleep better knowing all that.
This is also really handy because there's only so much suspension of disbelief one can handle in a show like Buffy. Sunnydale as a citywide concept just doesn't make sense. They have this insanely high body count month to month. Mystical creatures are converging upon the town at a constant and obvious rate, and yet nobody is the wiser except for Buffy's crew. Buffy regularly encounters intel about monsters before they become a problem, and circumstances often line up unrealistically to set up a convenient final battle. Examples in season 2 are Inca Mummy Girl, when the titular mummy pretends she is a transfer student who is meant to temporarily live at the Summers household, or the episode Ted, when an evil robot falls in love with Joyce and conveniently no other woman around her age. That's all to say, for Joyce to know that Buffy isn't a bad person and that she can handle herself, it lends a lot of flexibility to the plot that previously felt unearned. But I realize I'm getting distracted from Spike and Drusilla. Big surprise, the end of School Hard ends with a win for the Scooby Gang. Xander manages to escape the property during the lockdown alive and enlists Angel to fend off Spike, allowing for Buffy to escort her mother and other civilians from the school while he's distracted. Important plot developments do arise in how Angel distracts Spike. He walks into the front of the school and acts evil, and turns out these two vampires are old buds. More importantly, Angel is called Angelus by Spike, and it's revealed in this conversation that Angel was in fact Spike's sire. And that's a pretty big development they just kind of sweep in. We'll also learn later that Angel is the one to convert Drusilla as well, but that process was much more sinister. Anyway, Spike ultimately doesn't fall for the Angelus act. Before they can really fight, however, Buffy shows up, having rescued all the parents and teachers, and kicks Spike's ass, sending him home.
Women!
The episode ends with Drusilla and Spike needlessly killing the Anointed One by putting him in sunlight, which, good, he was a vestige of the old plot and didn't have a personality at all. The next really important plot point with Spike and Drusilla arrives in a two-parter episode called What's My Line? This pair of episodes is really pivotal for a lot of relationships and a lot of important story beats, so I'm going to go back and refer to this episode a number of times. There are various threads that weave their way in and out of this couplet, and I don't want to miss the good stuff. For now, I do want to talk about the main premise of this episode. Spike and Drusilla are trying to transcribe this old manuscript, which may contain a cure for Drusilla's illness. They send one of their lackeys to obtain an item called the Dulac Cross, which somehow functions to decode the text the curative ritual is within. The excavation of that cross from a mausoleum tips off the Scooby Gang, but Spike and Drusilla occupy those guys by sicking some bounty hunters called the Order of Taraka on them. This allows Spike to set up the ritual, which also involves capturing and sacrificing Angel to restore Drusilla's health. Thanks to some earlier hijinks in the episode, this particular task isn't too hard, so the ritual is set up without issue. However, because it's the Scooby Gang, they're able to intervene before Angel is truly sacrificed. There's this big fight scene between the good guys and Spike, along with the Order of Taraka, and Spike realizes they're facing a losing battle. In a last-ditch effort to save himself and his girlfriend, he picks up Drusilla and attempts to flee the church, but Buffy makes an entire organ fall on both of them, presumably killing them.
I'm good.
So this is a happy day for the good guys. However, again, at the end of the episode, after everything's been wrapped up, we see a shot of Drusilla rising out of the ashes carrying Spike. The power dynamic has completely inverted, and Drusilla has become the powerful one, with Spike ultimately confined to a wheelchair because of his injuries. This shift in power away from Spike is actually pivotal in the main plot, so I'm going to pause the Drusilla and Spike romance for now and come back to it at a later time. So, point number 2, Xander and Cordelia. I wanted to move on to a lighter subject for now, and in terms of all the romances that go on in season 2, theirs is treated with the least amount of heft, which is nice actually. They're the funny couple of the season. Now Cordelia, being Cordelia, has historically trash-talked anyone who isn't herself in the series, often hurling insults and low blows based off appearance or intelligence, even in sensitive situations. Xander, on the other hand, has always been snarky or hostile in return when Cordelia throws these insults, but in season 2, the dynamic becomes very one-to-one transactional, I'd say. In contrast, Cordelia opts for less targeted harassment towards the likes of Buffy and the Scooby Gang, usually only spouting harsh judgment when she wrongly believes the statement that she is saying is neutral in tone. For example, in one episode, Cordelia comments on the flatness of Willow's hair, thinking she's being constructive and not mean, when that obviously is not the case. But for Xander, because he's trying to stand up for himself, Cordelia takes that as a challenge, and they start throwing childish insults at each other in rapid succession. This happens consistently throughout the season, with the notable exception of episode 2. In this episode, Cordelia was nearly the victim of a Frankenstein monster, and Xander saved her. After that conflict, as Xander is complaining to Willow that everyone in the cast is linking up romantically, Cordelia tries to be vulnerable and sweet to Xander about how he was her hero, and he completely obliviously blows her off. So it's obvious that this couple won't be falling for each other in the traditional romantic way. More on that, returning to the two-parter episode What's My Line, we see their relationship dramatically shift. Xander and Cordelia have been paired together to find Buffy, and they go to the Summers household, but get ambushed by a bounty hunter from the Order of Taraka. They get trapped in the Summers basement, and...
Coward.
Moron.
I hate you!
I hate you!
They're not actually dating, they're just kissing a lot on the regular in broom closets and places where people won't find them. After What's My Line, Xander does try to speed things along by asking Cordelia to be his date to Buffy's birthday party, but keeping in mind that Cordelia is very popular and Xander is a verified weirdo, she turns the idea down. That said, they're both at the party and will continue to make out in the future, but their budding relationship is very much kept a secret for now. Well, for the rest of the episode at least. In episode 14, Innocence, Willow, of all people, finds them kissing and understandably gets really upset because she had a crush on Xander. We're going to talk about Willow in just a minute and that whole debacle later, but for the sake of continuity, we'll just say that the Scooby Gang for now is in the know. What I will say is that Willow gets a romantic interest during this season that's not Xander, and while Xander isn't obviously upset or jealous, he does regularly interrupt his makeout sessions with Cordelia to babble on about how he isn't sure what Willow sees in him, etc., etc. At one point, even, Willow is talking with Cordelia on a friendly level, and Willow makes this really astute observation about him. To quote, "He's so busy looking around at everything he doesn't have, he doesn't even realize what he does have." There isn't an immediate resolution to this observation because the episode is largely focused on Willow and other characters, but it's an interesting character flaw that the show doesn't actually waste or let fester. Episode 16, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, and say that 3 times fast, takes a dramatic turn when Cordelia's popular friends criticize Cordy for dating Xander. As far as I know, they're official as a couple by this point, but Cordelia bows to the social pressure and breaks up with him, which she actually really doesn't want to do.
It's beautiful. I want to break up.
But Xander takes it to heart and enlists Amy. Do you remember Amy, the witch's daughter from season 1? Yeah, she comes back around just for this one episode in season 2. Anyway, he enlists Amy to cast a love spell on Cordelia so that he can break up with her, but the spell backfires and causes the entire woman population of Sunnydale, except for Cordelia, to become romantically obsessed with Xander, to the point that after a while, a mob of women full of obsessive rage try to kill him and Cordelia in the Summers basement of all places. I won't spend too long on this episode, but something really important happens between Xander and Buffy. Buffy is the first girl to be affected by the spell, and naturally she escalates through lust and then passion before everyone else. At the start of season 2, Xander actually, and very annoyingly, resumes his crush for Buffy, and it just doesn't make any sense. Right now, at least. But this episode, after Xander realizes that Buffy's flirtation is false and that she's not in her right mind, he makes the active and conscious effort to turn her down, which goes to show that Xander isn't all that bad of a guy. This sort of behavior just means he's hit the minimum requirement of not being an asshole, but with Xander, you gotta take character growth wherever you can get it, especially because later in the season, he regresses in some very, very frustrating ways. This episode is also really big for Cordelia as an individual, and not just as one part in the Xander-Cordelia couple. Once the conflict of the love spell has been resolved, she goes back to her popular friends who actually continue to bully and berate Xander whenever they see him. But Cordelia isn't the basic Regina George style mean girl she used to be. I just want to put this clip in because I love it so much.
And here I am, scrambling for your approval when I'm way cooler than you are, because I'm not a sheep. I do what I want to do, and I wear what I want to wear. And you know what? I'll date whoever the hell I want to date. No matter how lame he is.
I think the way Cordelia conveys her feelings and resentments in this scene is very her. No other main cast member could or would go about saying this same sentiment in the same, still superficial way she does. Cordelia isn't some 100% different character now. She's still very much her scathing, superficial self, but once you get beneath the surface, there are layers of compassion and confidence that make her so much more interesting than before. It's why I say I like her, and paired with Out of Mind, Out of Sight from season 1, the Buffyverse makes a strong case for Cordelia as a nuanced, pivotal member of the Scooby Gang. After this point, Cordelia fully immerses herself in the Scooby Gang dynamic, and in the next episode, you even see her patrolling for vampires with Willow and Xander when Buffy is out sick. She's there because she cares for them and wants to contribute, even if she doesn't always have the tact or the manners to play nicely. It's also probably obvious when I say Xander and Cordelia got back together and are more confident than ever with their dynamic. They still fight, obviously, but it's less scathing. That's all I have for Xander and Cordelia, so moving on to point number 3. Willow and Oz. I deliberately arranged them after the last couple because this relationship is introduced and explored with a bit more weight to it, I think. Good way, I mean. Like, I feel these two are taken a bit more seriously, so the honeymoon moments feel a bit more genuine and less for comic relief. That's not to disparage the Cordy and Xander thing either, because I think they added a good balance for the show's overall tone. Anyway, we all know who Willow is by this point, so the question becomes, who is Oz? The writers actually do a really nice job of introducing Oz because he doesn't just pop up in a random plot and stick around. Instead, in the earliest episodes of season 2, there will often be these short scenes of Oz on his own, driving his van or talking with someone in his band, and then he'll spot Willow from afar. Sometimes he'll try and talk to her and miss her, other times he'll just see her and be enamored with how she looks, or stands around, or behaves. And here we are, returning to the two-part episode, What's My Line? And see what I mean when I say that this episode was really important? A running plot in this episode is that a career fair is going on in Sunnydale High, and the Scooby Gang must learn what careers they may be destined to have in their adult life. Willow, for the fact that she is incredibly intelligent, is one of 2 students in the entire school, selected by some big-name software agency who wants to hire them. And guess what? The other student is Oz. They presumably introduce themselves to each other, but I don't think much happens there because it doesn't happen on screen. As a side note, I watched this two-parter twice, once for the plot and once for the commentary. I don't think I'm going to make a habit of watching or talking about the commentary because a lot of the time, all the directors and writers do is like drone on about the set design or small details that aren't really important. Plus, if it's a very plot-heavy episode, it's usually Joss Whedon who's speaking over the footage, and I'm not going to subject myself or you to that man if I don't have to. But this one was interesting. This one was commented on by Marty Noxon, who at the time was the co-executive producer for Buffy the Vampire Slayer and a writer for the What's My Line 2 episodes. Concerning Oz and Willow, this scene was interesting to hear from her perspective because beyond doing the service of making them acquainted, it largely served to pose these two characters as equals, as having something in common. Later, Willow believes that Oz is just a friend, and the only reason he really looks at her from afar is because they are expressing, quote, computer nerd solidarity, as Willow explains to Buffy. But Oz immediately challenges that and approaches Willow, and they both talk about how they turned down the software dudes. Things are growing slowly between these two, but they haven't expressed any feelings quite yet. Side note, Oz does take a bullet for Willow in this episode. If you remember, Spike and Drusilla hired the Order of Taraka to K-word Buffy, and in this scene, a woman disguised as a police officer shoots up the school in an attempt to take the bounty. Yikes. No one's hurt, but it's very romantic. At the end of the episode, when the couples are mostly just chatting, Oz tells Willow that she has the sweetest smile he's ever seen, and she's very endeared that he protected her like that. Like, y'all, I just get giddy rewatching the Oz and Willow stuff. I smile every time, and it doesn't help that Seth Green is just like the cutest guy from the turn of the century. I admit it, I'm also Ozpilled. It feels a lot more relatable than the Buffy and Angel stuff, and a lot less hokey than the Cordelia and Xander stuff. I will say, I really liked the Giles and Jenny relationship as well, which I'm gonna get into later, don't worry. But I'd say these two are my favorite in the series so far. In episode 13, surprise, their casual chatting gets upgraded to dating when Willow asks Oz to be her date to Buffy's birthday party, which he says yes to. This is also the episode where Oz gets clued in on the whole Hellmouth debacle, because Buffy stakes and kills a vampire in front of him. Honestly, Oz is a great character. He's comedically unaffected by everything that happens around him. When he is shot, he's mostly just like, ow. When he learns vampires are real, he's mostly just like, yep, that explains a lot. Episode 14, Innocence, is the episode that Willow learns about Xander and Cordelia's relationship. Willow subconsciously tries to retaliate and make Xander jealous, using Oz to do so. At one point, she asks Oz if he wants to make out, but he turns her down.
Well, to the casual observer, it would appear that you're trying to make your friend Xander jealous. And that's on the empty side. See, in my fantasy, when I'm kissing you, you're kissing me. It's okay. I can wait.
If that is not the cutest shit that I've ever seen, I would love to have someone think of me the same way that Oz thinks of Willow. Another funny thing about Oz, which the show just rolls with, is the fact that at this point Seth Green is becoming like an A-list actor in movies like Idle Hands and obviously Austin Powers. So his hair color is constantly changing. At one point, I can't remember which episode, someone else points out the change in his hair, and he's just like, yeah, that happens. So Cordy and Xander had Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, dedicated to their romantic exploits. Meanwhile, Oz and Willow have Phases, which is all about werewolves. Which, hell yeah, I'm surprised it took them this long to cover werewolves, but, it finally happened. I'll spare you the details and give away the fun part. Oz is a werewolf. He doesn't know he is at the start of the episode, and he doesn't tell the Scooby Gang the news at first, because they think the werewolf has slaughtered a few people, which he hasn't, so they're going to kill it. The episode is cute because an important subplot is that Willow thinks that Oz is pulling away. Not that he's not interested, but that he's waiting for the perfect moment. This line of thinking is based off that last clip I showed where Oz is like, I want everything to be perfect. But Willow is frankly tired of waiting. She complains near the start of the episode that she wants to kiss him already, and Buffy encourages her to make the first move. Which she does, to her credit. After the misunderstanding is sorted out and the Scooby Gang learns of Oz's lycanthropy, the couple resumes their romantic feelings and Willow kisses him first. This is a really transformative moment for her character because she has officially, actively moved on from Xander. She has become her own person and she no longer pines for Xander uselessly. Like, ever again. It's very refreshing. Sparing the details, this pairing remains steadfast throughout the rest of the season. At this point, Oz isn't a main character in the theme song yet, so he doesn't show up for every scene or every episode, but he really does make it count when he shows up. To tie out the last two couples, in the finale of the season, there's this point where Willow has been knocked unconscious and the doctors believe she may enter a coma if she doesn't wake up soon. Xander, having a moment alone with Willow, expresses his love and friendship for her in a really endearing, honest way. I personally interpreted this confession of love to be very platonic, but it's interesting. This speech does rouse Willow from her sleep, but the first word to come out of her mouth is Oz's name. This is another strong piece of development for Xander. You can see here when she says Oz that he has the faintest expression of disappointment, but he doesn't let it last. Immediately, he steps aside and has Oz take his place to comfort her, then goes off to find a doctor. I think I really just have to commend Nicholas Brendon, who plays Xander, for how he expresses his emotions and conveys the complex imperfections of Xander's character. He's very honorable in certain lights, and then in others, he just becomes very quietly despicable. Because as it turns out, like I mentioned, his pining for Buffy never fully leaves his system after season 1, and it still affects some of the decisions he makes, even if he doesn't outwardly try to pursue her. I'm mostly talking about how he is very envious and resentful that Angel is dating Buffy, sometimes speaking against Angel with legitimate reason, and other times doing so without justification. The show writers like to blend these characters in a way that makes Xander's character motivations very gray, and I really commend it. Which does lead me to my fourth point, Angel and Buffy. We were bound to get here eventually, and it's a pretty hefty one to go over. And reminder that I'm literally giving spoilers for the entire season of a very good show, so if you find yourself interested from season 1, you still have time to stop now, because I haven't gone over the big story beats yet. So, pausing. Are we all good? Okay, so since the end of season 1, Buffy's actually been living with her dad in Los Angeles, so she's had absolutely no time to spark things up with Angel again. In fact, when she returns to Sunnydale for school, it's obvious she's not interested in being a friend or lover to anyone. She's still experiencing post-traumatic stress from actually being killed by the Master, and it's made her very distant upon returning to Sunnydale. The whole of episode 1 goes over her processing her trauma, so I'll leave it there, but the point is that the Angel-Buffy romance is a slow start for season 2. At the end of episode 2, Buffy and Angel admit their romantic feelings for one another again, and by episode 5, Buffy is dreaming about Angel. At this point, she even asks if he'll, go on a coffee date with her of all things, and he's just like, no. We have a 225 years age difference, as if that ever stopped him from kissing her before and, macking on her. Because it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, she ends up going on a pseudo date with some other guy at a frat party, but it turns out that that guy wants to sacrifice her to a snake demon. Just another day in Sunnydale, and Angel has to save her. Actually, before he agrees to do so, Willow steps up and reprimands Angel because he's uselessly beating around the bush with Buffy despite harboring genuine feelings for her. Once that episode's conflict is all resolved, boom, Angel agrees to go on the coffee date with her. So things are on the up and up. By episode 6, they're fully macking on each other, so things are getting serious. And by episode 7, they're finally in a good place, so conflict is naturally being inserted into the plot. So we already talked about how Angel is a good guy because the Roma cursed him to have a soul and remember all of his crimes, right? Well, before then, when he was known as Angelus, Angel actually committed a few atrocities to Drusilla before turning her into a vampire. In fact, if it weren't for Angel, Drusilla wouldn't have ever gone mad. In episode 7, titled Lie to Me, one person from Buffy and Angel's past each come into play. Buffy's made aware of Drusilla, and Ford, a crush Buffy had in her old school, enrolls in Sunnydale High. Ford's interest as an old figure in Buffy's life, as a side note, is really interesting because it's one of the very few times, if not the only time, that a relic from Buffy's past swings back around. Unfortunately, he's just a tertiary character and, in fact, evil, so we don't hear more from him after this episode. Drusilla, on the other hand, Buffy in the audience learns, Angelus deliberately and aggressively pursued human Drusilla after he learned of her psychic affliction. He saw her as this pure entity, and Drusilla, because she thought she had a devilish affliction, wanted to be pure and godly, so it was a perfect setup for him. Angel systematically killed everyone that was important to Drusilla, much in the same way that he later killed everyone connected to that Romani girl. He actively drove Drusilla insane, convincing her that she was a devil child, and pretty much corrupted every part of her mind until she was very mentally fragile. After fleeing from the tragedy of her murdered family, Drusilla joins a convent and was going to give herself to the Lord as a nun, I guess, but Angelus turned her into a vampire on the day that she was meant to take her vows, basically putting the nail in the coffin of her brain. It's actually a really tragic story because in the finale, we do get a flashback of a very coherent and sane Drusilla confessing her sins to a priest. It's the only time in the series, I think, where we really see her as this normal human person, and the very next scene we see deranged vampire Drusilla in modern day. It's a very stark contrast, and it reminds me of how vampires, in the Buffyverse at least, are likened to demons inhabiting the bodies of the dead, who remember the person you used to be and basically bastardize it. We actually get that description in Lie to Me from Buffy, just to get myself back on track. The thing is that when Angel explains this past to her, it doesn't drive Buffy away. I mean, yeah, it upsets her, and it's something that she has to work through before staying with Angel, but she doesn't turn him away immediately. For all intents and purposes, Angel is a completely different entity than his soulless self, and she takes that to heart. The episode ends on the note that Buffy tells Angel she loves him, but that she doesn't trust him. So there's that. By episode 9, Buffy tells Angel, quote, "You're the one freaky thing in my freaky world that still makes sense to me." So it's obvious that Angel's history isn't a hindrance in the long run. That quote was actually from What's My Line, but the only plot point I'll mention here is that Buffy and Angel go on a date to a skating rink, and they're ambushed by a hunter from the Order Taraka. It's fine, they kill him, but what's really sweet is after the fight, Buffy sees Angel with his vampire face on, and instead of recoiling, she embraces him like that, tending to a wound on his face. As a reminder, this is the episode I was listening to the commentary by Marty Noxon, and she says here, quote, "Buffy for the first time, I think maybe the only time, kisses Angel when he's a vampire. And it was a real important scene because we wanted to show she was really beginning to accept him and really acknowledge who he was and not be afraid of him anymore." Episode 13 and 14 are vital in terms of the Buffy and Angel romance, but more importantly, it shifts the entire power dynamic through the season. If you remember, I previously said that Spike and Drusilla were the ostensible big bads of the season, and this is where that statement falls apart. So, Buffy and Angel are becoming very intimate. In fact, things get so intimate that when Buffy is at school, she tells Willow that she thinks she and Angel are going to, make love. And she predicts correctly. Later, Buffy and Angel have a fight with Drusilla and Spike, and the two good guys lose and barely escape with their lives. It starts raining, and they determine that they have to hide and take shelter at Angel's place. So yeah, they're all wet and tired. And they have sex. But there are other important plot developments which arise earlier in the episode that give context to what happens next. To return to Jenny Calendar, I already revealed that she is in fact of Romani heritage, but what's important is that the other characters in the audience upon the episode's premiere didn't have this information. It turns out Jenny Calendar is actually a spy for the Romani people, placed in Sunnydale to watch over Angel and make sure he continues suffering with a soul. Now the question becomes, why does she need to watch him? Well, it turns out the way Angel loses his soul and breaks the Romani curse is by experiencing a singular moment of true happiness. I'll get back to Jenny Calendar and her plot in a few minutes, but it turns out, by having sex, Angel, at least momentarily, feels truly happy. The drama of this episode is he loses his soul at the very end. Buffy is oblivious and sleeping in his bed, and Angel runs out into the street at night, clutching his chest and calling out Buffy's name. But it's too late. He is no longer Angel, he is Angelus. Episode 13 and 14 really go hand in hand, and I'd call it a two-parter in many ways because the monster plaguing Sunnydale is the same in both, but that guy, the judge, he's not really important in the long run. What really pairs these two episodes together is the setup of Angel's true happiness and the immediate fallout as Angelus joins the dark side. The first thing that Angelus does isn't, kill the Slayer, but to fuck with her, just like he twisted Drusilla's mind back in the day. It's actually a really tragic scene for Buffy because obviously she's very sensitive right now emotionally after losing her virginity, and Angelus waltzes in pretending he's still Angel and basically acts like the biggest fuckboy on the planet.
You got a lot to learn about men, kiddo. Although I guess you proved that last night.
This is obviously really devastating, and I think even talking about it would diminish the really hard feelings the show explores. What I will say is that later in this episode, there are flashbacks to the sex scene, and oh my god, it is the worst thing I think I've ever seen on TV. It's like the stereotypical PG sex scene where all you see are various ambiguous shots of skin and moving around on sheets and soft music, and the camera fades in and out a lot. I feel like Buffy must have had a hand in creating that trope. It's the only part of the episode that I can really make fun of. The next episode I want to talk about in relation to these two is episode 17, Passion, and this is probably the most dramatic episode in the entire season besides the finale. I legitimately was in my feelings when I rewatched this episode, and I already knew exactly what was going to happen. Zelda, no! Zelda! 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 Thank you. I've tried to rewatch Buffy multiple times in the past to some success, but sometimes you just know what tragedies are awaiting the characters, so I don't know. It's always de-incentivized me from continuing. It's why I haven't really returned to a show like Game of Thrones either, because so many of my favorite characters just die off and I don't want to endure that pain twice. Okay, yes, a lot of things have changed. I've got a haircut, and if you recall, the last time I did the video, it was on my birthday, which is January 11th, and as of today, it's like March 2nd, so I took a lot of time off, but that's because I like to procrastinate a lot, so here we are. But I want to continue talking about this episode, and I'm going to do so with a lot of depth because everything is important and very, very good, so buckle up. The first thing, it didn't take much research to learn that this episode aired just like 10 days after Valentine's Day in 1998, and the episode itself takes place just prior to Valentine's Day. So if it wasn't obvious, the entirety of this season is based around romance. Whether genuine or merely lust, Passion steps in as a kind of exclamation point to ward off all doubt. In many ways, for a few of the key romances in this season, it's the breakup episode, whether that means finally realizing your lover is no longer the person he used to be, or that your budding romance is violently and tragically dashed for you. An important plot point is that earlier in episode 14, Innocence, Ginny Calendar's arc in the main plot unfolds. Put shortly, Ginny's very traditional Romani uncle arrives in Sunnydale and admonishes her for slacking on her duties to protect Angel's soul. A really weird detail about this that's mentioned in Passion is how Ginny didn't even know what the ramifications would be if Angel experienced true happiness. She was never told by her Romani ancestors about the details of the curse itself. To quote Ginny herself, "I was sent here to watch you. They told me to keep you and Angel apart. They never told me what would happen. Angel was supposed to pay for what he did to my people." She knew she had this vague job to keep, but honestly, happiness seems like an impossible thing to safeguard. She could have sabotaged Buffy and Angel's relationship, and to her credit, she tried to distance them from one another at least on one occasion, but it's laughably unsuccessful. To explain in episode 13, Surprise, she urges Angel to leave the country alone while in possession of a detached demon arm, because if said demon were to fully reassemble in corporeal form, it could destroy all of human life. This suggestion she makes is to keep Buffy and Angel from falling in love, which admittedly does stem from an ulterior motive, but it probably would have been the plan even if Ginny wasn't the one to suggest it. This whole plot detail ends up being moot anyway because Angel and Buffy are ambushed as they say their goodbyes and the demon arm is stolen from them. And that's the one time Ginny ever acts from a less than ideal position. When Giles and the rest of the Scooby Gang learn of Ginny's past, which she kept secret, they act as if she has betrayed them. This reveal happens right around the time that Angel loses his soul, so I get that everyone's pretty sensitive, but I always felt this emotional fallout and reactive distancing from Jenny was really convoluted and poorly justified. Like, I get they're hurt that Jenny had no ulterior motive, but she only acted out of the will of her people, and even if you wanted to protest that aspect of her character motivation, Jenny honestly and vulnerably explains after the fact that she never showed up to deceive or hurt anybody. And realistically, when you recognize her primary goal in the series, that is to make Angel keep his soul, it lines up perfectly with what the Scooby Gang wants as well. Everyone thinks it's a good idea that the good guy stays good. It's a bipartisan issue, disregarding the connotation of generational vengeance. All these character beats are an important setup for passion because by the time this episode premieres, Jenny has absolutely, resolutely decided she wants to make amends, not only with Buffy, but also with Giles. I haven't talked about the romance yet, but I'm going to talk about it after I finish up with the Buffy Angel stuff. Ginny, being a techno-pagan girl boss, has been privately working on translating a spell lost to time, the Ritual of Restoration, which her Romani ancestors previously used on Angel to ensoul him. Allegedly, she's been working on constructing a computer program which can translate the Old Romanian to English, and the ritual itself also involves obtaining what's called an Orb of Thessala, a conduit for souls. At this point, by the way, Drusilla receives a convenient portent foretelling of Ginny's plans. We'll get back to the evil in just a second. The most important aspect of this plot thread right now is that Ginny keeps the whole spell thing secret. When she successfully translates the old ritual on her school computer, she notably stores the translated text both on her desktop and in a floppy disk, which you should always back up your files, people. But what Ginny doesn't account for when she translates the ritual is that she is a secondary character, alone in a scene at night, having just pushed the plot forward in a vital way, and she hasn't told anyone about what she's accomplished. So when the camera pans over from her desk and you see Angelus watching her in the shadows, you get this unique and terrible sense of dread. You may not realize it at the time, but when you factor in every main character moving around in the episode, you realize none of them are physically present to provide plot armor over her, to intervene on her behalf. There was a similar sequence in an earlier episode after Angel has become Angelus. He approaches Willow in the school at night, pretending he's Angel, but ultimately preparing to kill her. What stops that from happening, one, is that nearly every main character is on school grounds at that moment, providing an abundance of opportunities and characters who can save Willow. In that sequence, funnily enough, it's Ginny Calendar who is able to stall Angelus before Buffy arrives on the scene to hold him off. And for whatever reason, Xander is able to intuit that Angel is bad and converges upon the scene as well. These plot circumstances all line up to make that version of events very typical. A character is put in danger, but ultimately you know nothing crazy is going to happen in terms of life and death. But with this Ginny scene in passion, every possible encouraging factor is absent. Nobody knows what Ginny is doing, what she's accomplished, nor that Angel even has an immediate motivation to thwart her plans. Yes, everyone is in danger all the time, but there's no special reason to target Ginny right after this moment. Buffy isn't there with a stake and a one-liner to help her. In this scene, Angelus completely destroys Ginny's computer and the printed out spell, assuming that these were the only copies available and thus protecting his soulless evil form. Ginny manages to escape out of her classroom, and what follows is a chase sequence for the ages. Strangely enough, this reminds me in some ways of Scream's chase sequences between Ghostface and the victim, because the victim will always throw down some large object to trip the bad guy. There is a sense of real-life truth when someone who is being preyed upon provides some defense in that way, or is being able to close the door on the bad guy in time. But this is Angelus, and Angelus, more than any other vampire we know, plays with his food. While Ginny is running from hallway to hallway, I think there is a genuine moment where you think, yes, she can do this, she can make this, she can escape. There's something so strong about the way Ginny is able to carry herself, even through fear. She runs up a flight of stairs and heals flawlessly, and I know I couldn't have done that. I don't know many people really could have done that. And I think it's definitely such a praiseworthy moment for the writers and showrunners, because for just an inkling of a second, against all odds as the viewer, you're able to play momentarily with hope and denial. But
Sorry, Jenny. This is where you get off.
if he killed her in a flash, yes, I think an audience would be genuinely affected, but not nearly so strongly as this. Buffy, because it's a show about supernatural creatures, is predisposed with the ability to make horror-themed plots. For the most part, I'd say it doesn't go into the true horror category. Its style of production and plot development doesn't really lend itself to being so hopeless from the jump, which is what a lot of popular horror movies embrace. If you're going to be killed by a demon in 7 days or callously hunted in the woods with no sign of rescue, you're faced with your own mortality in ways that inspire very human, existential dread, even beyond mortality. For Buffy, I think there are scary things that happen. Sometimes monsters are legitimately terrifying, such as the gentleman from Hush in season 4, but that episode also has some of the funniest moments as well. In another sense, Buffy plays skillfully with concepts like dread, existential fear, and death, but the show writers don't typically manipulate that story into traditional horror. They don't present those heavy moments with the intention to scare you outright. But this particular scene in season 2 really hits the nail on the head in terms of being legitimate horror. Like, despite knowing the outcome, my heart still beats pretty fast when I give this a rewatch. It was a very fortunate setup. If Ginny was any more pivotal to the plot, or any more beloved by fans, it's possible the writers would have chickened out from making this a thrilling, terrible moment. If Ginny were any less important, the audience wouldn't feel anything at all. She'd be just another dead body found in a locker, spurring the plot forward and quickly leaving our conscience. Season 2 and 3 really get this balance perfect in a wide swath of episodes, and I think it's why season 4, for example, suffers from a lack of very human tension and stakes. Again, I love season 4, but it does receive some justifiable criticism in the end, especially in comparison to these early seasons. Anyway, we're going to a point in the plot where a lot of character relationships are converging and changing rapidly. To keep things brief on the Buffy-Angel relationship, it's obvious things are long dead, but the pivotal change is that in learning of Ginny's death, Buffy no longer feels conflicted. Angelus ultimately has played with his food a bit too aggressively and for a bit too long. In a previous episode, Buffy even had the opportunity to dust Angel, but ultimately had to walk away, letting him escape. But there's no confusion or conflict in her mind at the end of this episode. Angel is gone, and Angelus is merely a monster in desperate need of being slain. Switching gears a bit, I'll return to the Spike-Drusilla relationship for a moment. In retrospect, having talked about all the heavy things regarding Angelus, Spike and Drusilla seem a bit pushed to the side. Though, to be fair, I have been saying stuff like Angelus and the other bad guys, so it's not the show's fault. In fact, the show very happily jumps on exploring the shifting dynamics between Spike, Drusilla, and Angelus. As you may remember, all the power switched to Drusilla once she was restored in Spike's ritual, and Spike has been confined to a wheelchair. When Angel becomes Angelus, he very quickly joins the lovely couple. Drusilla is happy to let him rejoin their gang, and Spike, in so few words, is apprehensive about his return. Apprehensive very quickly develops into resentment and then loathing as Angelus assumes the role of head honcho, kicking Spike into third place. Not only does Angelus immediately start calling the shots, but he quickly starts openly flirting with Drusilla as well, which she doesn't turn down. In fact, she leans heavily into it, which I guess is in part because she's evil and chaotic, but also verifiably deranged. And because Spike is confined to a wheelchair, plus the understated fact that Angelus is Spike and Drusilla's sire, he doesn't fight back so much as fruitlessly complain about their flagrant sexual energies. If Angelus is Lestat from Interview with a Vampire, Drusilla is his Louis, and Spike is very much his Claudia, sans the pampering. Not to mention the fact that Spike very much tried to kill the Slayer on multiple occasions and failed miserably, and Angelus isn't one to mince words. That's all I'll say about them until the finale, but it's just funny to see how dramatically Spike has fallen from the role of Big Bad in a mere 17 episodes, and as the series progresses, things only get more interesting on his part. So now I'm going to move on to point number 5, Giles and Jenny. When I was arranging all my talking points, I was having a tough time figuring out where to place them, because ultimately their romance is its own thing in season 2, and functionally speaking, doesn't contribute much to the larger plot, but is itself very beautiful and well written. But I didn't want to give away that it was tragically cut short at the same time I was talking about, Cordelia and Xander. The tone just didn't seem right. There may have been inklings of this romance in season 1, but Jenny only showed up in 2 episodes, one of them being the finale, so what little time she had was dedicated to being Giles' intellectual foil and providing a witchy perspective for the Scooby Gang. The very first scene Giles and Jenny share together in season 2, however, is rife with sexual energy.
Every time a pretty girl walks by, every boy turns into a gibbering fool.
Miss Calendar.
Mr. Giles.
Well, hello?
See the way these kids gaze at each other? Oh, Minnie.
It's good to see you.
Giles is always stumbling over his words. It's a very deliberate character decision, but around Ginny, it's less to do with the fact that he's a fuddy-duddy, as Ginny calls him, but that he's enamored with her, and frankly has no idea how to deal with those feelings. There's a scene in episode 2 that really encapsulates their dynamic, and this is when Giles is trying to ask her out on a date, but legitimately can't figure out how to act normal or casual about it. Ultimately, he fails at saying the words, but Ginny, being confident and friendly and very forward with her feelings, asks him out instead. Once they start dating, Ginny challenges Giles in just about every respect of the word. She doesn't go on quaint library dates with him and maintain the status quo. She takes him to football games and monster truck rallies. On her own, Ginny is known to go to Burning Man, and we already know she's cool because she's a techno-pagan, and she's very self-assured and self-possessed, and I realize I've already described her like that before. But a good character decision they gave Ginny is that she likes seeing Giles all flustered around her. A large part of the reason she's attracted to him, I think, is because he's different from her, very formal and straight-laced, and she likes to see how she can unlace him, essentially making him reconsider the old, stuffy ways of the Watchers Council as, old. In a very important Giles episode titled The Dark Age, the entire Scooby Gang, besides Ginny, overtly observe and validate to themselves that Giles is simply very bland and a responsible person, that he's always been this by-the-books adult who can't help but follow the rules. But Ginny, who so consistently prods at the protective exterior, is starting to see the very interesting man underneath. Or even if she's not necessarily privy to his backstory quite yet, she's still happy to ruffle his edges and break down those walls. It turns out that Giles hasn't always been the responsible librarian the kids know him to be. In fact, Giles was kind of a bad boy in his youth. I don't want to dive too deep into this episode, but to keep it brief, when Giles first went to university at a young age, he was resentful of his Watcher destiny and retaliated by shirking off all of his duties. Calling himself Ripper, he and a small group of friends formed an amateurish warlock cult where they would collectively summon a demon called Igon and willingly let it possess them one by one, essentially giving them a major high, essentially passing around a demon bong. It wasn't exactly safe or responsible, and the dark magics greatly affected Giles' demeanor, his personality, his whole outlook on life. Having that sense of power made him and the other warlocks feel drunk and reckless, just until Igon's possession of a friend ended up killing him. After that, as far as I know, the cult went their separate ways and forgot about Igon, and Giles accepted his responsibilities as Watcher. The point of mentioning that is, of course, to give Giles a sense of depth, which frankly he really needed. In the Dark Age, Igon returns by slowly killing off Giles' cult of warlock friends across the globe, just until Giles is left. Actually, no, it's Giles and an old friend turned enemy named Ethan Rain, who was also a warlock but never truly turned away from chaos and destruction. But he's not super important, tragically. What is important is that while Igon tries to reach Giles, it ends up possessing Ginny. In short, the Scooby Gang is able to rescue her while also destroying Igon in the process, but the possession has seriously disturbed her, understandably. So she puts her relationship with Giles on pause, much to his dismay. This pause lasts about 3 episodes before Ginny forgives him and they kiss very passionately. In fact, by the end of episode 11, they're much closer than before. Oh, and Ginny accidentally shoots Giles with a crossbow this episode. It's not super relevant, I just thought it was funny. Naturally, just a few episodes later, the Romani reveal happens and Giles has to distance himself from Ginny. It's obvious he's apprehensive about the distance, but he's more supportive of Buffy and her feeling of betrayal at this point than he is in love with Ginny. Or rather, I'd actually say that this was a tough conflict within Giles, but he's first a man of principle when danger's afoot, so he aligns with Buffy. Ginny is obviously very upset about this distance, but she understands why everybody feels the way they do. She tries to talk with Giles on occasion, but he respects Buffy's wishes, so he respectfully, tentatively turns her down. By episode 17, Passion, Buffy is still enforcing a feeling of betrayal, but she's cognizant enough of the fact that Giles sincerely misses Ginny, and in fact may love her. She approaches Ginny in this episode and in so few words tells Ginny she should continue her groveling, but she should reconcile with Giles in the meantime. This is where the heartbreak really happens. I already talked about how Ginny is K-worded in this episode, but Angelus really takes this horrifying and tragic death he inflicted and twists the knife as hard as possible. Before Giles leaves the school the day Ginny dies, she tells him she might have a breakthrough with the Angel situation and that they should get together that night. I don't know how Angel knew they were going to meet that night, but I guess the details aren't super important. When Giles gets home, he's surprised to find romantic music is playing. Rose petals are strewn across the floor and lead up the stairs to his bedroom. A bottle of champagne even is sitting with an ice bucket, and a letter sits on the table, simply saying upstairs in cursive. There is this terrible moment right as he approaches his front door where Giles finds the first rose and tentatively, lovingly smells it. He's genuinely happy and hopeful, and you can see in his smile that he's finally ready to let down those intense barriers he puts up for the rest of the world. It's possible that perhaps in this moment, he may have realized she was his match, his equal, a person who can challenge him, knowing all of him and saying, yes, I still want you. I think there's a certain expression that Anthony Stewart Head gets perfect here, almost like Giles is able to see the future, and it makes the moment of irony all the more horrific. When Giles finally starts ascending the staircase, he can spot the lower half of Ginny's body on his bed, and the scene instantly, dramatically turns south when you see Ginny's blank, dead eyes open and staring at the ceiling. It's a scene that I love for what it accomplishes, but I hate for what it leaves behind. I'm not sure if Giles ever truly meets his match in the same way, and certainly not romantically. Angelus irreparably destroyed something integral in Giles as a person and as a character. Giles continues to grow in interesting ways and be a pivotal member of the Scooby Gang, but nobody ever looks at him in quite the same way that Ginny did. While Angelus expects retaliation from Giles, he doesn't anticipate Giles' intensity and immediate action as the Watcher regresses to his dark, violent Ripper persona, ambushing Angelus at his home. Admittedly, Giles gets a few really satisfying hits on Angel, but Giles also recklessly ambushed the warehouse alone without the Slayer, a decision that nearly gets him killed. Luckily, Buffy is able to save Giles at the last minute, kicking Angel's ass in the process. Two fun things happen about this scene. First, Spike casually holds off Drusilla from intervening when Giles and Buffy converge upon Angel, and second, Giles gets knocked out when Angelus nearly chokes him. The circumstances aren't funny, but it's a good callback, which means, thank goodness, I finally finished all this romance, but I'm not done with the numbered list. Moving on to number 6, Kendra. I thoroughly avoided talking about Kendra up to this point, but I actually think she's a really interesting character. We're introduced to her in the 2-part episode What's My Line, where she arrives in Sunnydale by hiding in a plane's fuselage, or whatever that really means, because I don't really know what a fuselage is. It's part of a plane. If you remember from season 1's finale, Buffy actually briefly died when the Master bit her and dropped her in a puddle. You know, the moment when Xander has to provide CPR. Well, apparently, that death, despite only being a few minutes long, was enough to enact the Slayer prophecy and call upon the next girl in line for the position, even though Buffy was brought back to life. Which, if you haven't already put together, is Kendra. Kendra, contrary to Buffy, actually trained for years in her home country of Jamaica with her Watcher prior to being called upon. This detail is interesting, if only for the fact that we now know potential Slayers can be anticipated and trained in advance. By this detail alone, I know for a fact that there are probably hundreds of girls out there who were like Kendra, but not picked, but that's just a random aside. Kendra ultimately represents Buffy's opposite in a Slayer capacity. Everyone around Buffy, audience included, likely understood Buffy to be a rational, level-headed, and well-balanced Slayer, but Kendra's arrival on the scene sort of squashes that. Kendra is incredibly well-informed on these subjects of demonology, history, fighting strategies, and Slayer ethics, in terms of keeping one's distance from human society, at least. Kendra is also really unsocialized, however. While she's incredibly well-prepped to fill the Slayer role, she doesn't understand why Buffy collaborates with a team of civilians. She unilaterally disagrees with the fact that Buffy is dating a vampire, and she dissents to how Buffy can make important decisions on the fly without express permission from her Watcher. In many ways, Kendra's contrast to Buffy confirms a lot of the strict and unnatural rules a Slayer usually must live by, forgoing the normal human realm for an isolated, unfeeling life. Rather than doubting herself, Buffy loosely considers what a presence like Kendra could offer her. Would she still need to be the Slayer? Or could she give the job a rest for a while and go to Disneyland while Kendra fills in? In contrast, Buffy offers some substantial advice for Kendra as well. There's this one scene they share in Giles' office, and the audience is made privy to the secret inner world of the Slayer.
Emotions are weakness, Buffy. You shouldn't entertain them.
Kendra, my emotions give me power. They're total assets. That would be anger you're feeling.
What?
You feel it, right? How the anger gives you fire? Slayer needs that.
It's one of the few times Buffy really opens up about this supernatural power she possesses and the psychology of it. So Kendra isn't necessarily a two-dimensional figure meant to make Buffy look bad. She has a horrible fake accent, I know, yes. Bless Bianca Lawson, but she has a lot of layers to her, I'd say. She's a big nerd, and she doesn't know how to talk to boys, and she's presumably poor based on the fact that she owns exactly one shirt. She's also a person of color, which is something that has been pointedly absent on the series thus far and will remain a valid criticism throughout the show's run. She doesn't just make simple amends with Buffy, they're constantly fighting about the rules and ideals of being the Slayer, but they're still working together and looking badass all the while. I didn't actually talk about why she showed up, but we sort of already addressed it. Spike is doing a ritual to restore Drusilla's body. Kendra's watcher sent her to Sunnydale because she sensed those dangerous mystical energies converging, or something, and didn't realize the last Slayer was still kicking around. After the plot's episode is resolved, disappointingly, Kendra returns to Jamaica instead of bobbing around for a while, and the next time we see her, it's the finale. And yeah, she dies. I think if this were any other season besides the love season, she might have had a bigger role, maybe something Jenny Calendar sized, but we don't even get the chance. And just to jump ahead a bit, a different Slayer does replace Kendra, so it's not like the writers didn't want to enjoy a Slayer versus Slayer plot. They just don't want Kendra to be that part. I took pages and pages of notes on Kendra, and somehow I'm already done with her. But anyway, I've already talked about the majority of the season, so for the finale, I'll just wrap up by saying that Buffy, kills Angelus. She saves the world, and it's a big happy day. Or so you think. A few important things do happen in the last two episodes, titled Becoming Part 1 and Part 2. The first is that the Scooby Gang finds Jenny Calendar's floppy disk with the restoration spell, and Willow elects to perform the spell. She's been substituting for Mrs. Calendar's computer class, and she was going through all of her old teaching files, including witchy stuff. The gang thinks Willow shouldn't do it, but she insists. Second thing, Buffy is going to confront Angelus and save the world. I'll spare you the apocalypse part of the plot because it's just your standard end of the world fare, but she essentially has to sacrifice Angelus and send him through a portal to hell, saving the world in the process. In part 1 of Becoming, Willow actually tried the restoration spell and failed on account of Angelus' minions ambushing the scene and sending her into a temporary coma. So at this point, Buffy has ultimately concluded that Angel is no longer able to be saved. On her way to this final battle, she comes across Xander, who just came from the hospital after seeing Willow wake up. Willow told Xander to tell Buffy that they were retrying the restoration spell and that Buffy could potentially stall Angel instead of killing him. But you know what Xander doesn't do? Exactly fucking that. He just tells her, good luck. Like, literally, he's the worst character on Earth. I hate Xander. I have a whole rant in season 3 about Xander, and you just have to wait. At the very height of the Buffy-Angel battle, a hell portal has opened up and is set to consume the world. Buffy has perfectly positioned Angelus to stab him and send him through that portal, but right as she does so, Willow succeeds in performing the restoration spell from her hospital bed with the help of some Romani spirit that possesses her. Also, Xander never experiences repercussions for lying or just not telling all of the truth, but I don't have time to go over that. But cue the terrible and sad moment. Right as she's about to slay Angelus and save the day, his vampire expression completely disappears and Angel is suddenly back. But the portal is already open and Buffy has to save the world. There is literally no other option in front of her but to sacrifice him or see the apocalypse succeed. Even worse, Angel doesn't remember anything that happened since the night they made love. So he's very confused and genuinely heartbreakingly scared. It's actually very sad. All Buffy can do is comfort him, kiss him longingly, say that everything's okay, and then stab him, sending him to hell, to actual hell. Side note, Spike betrays Angelus. He regains mobility in his legs, knocks Drusilla out because she would probably follow Angelus into death if Spike didn't intervene, and drives out of Sunnydale in a poorly blacked out vehicle while she's unconscious in the passenger seat. Buffy actually let him escape because they forged an unsteady alliance against Angelus earlier in the episode. The enemy of my enemy is my friend and all that. I did forget to say, Joyce, Buffy's mom, does learn that Buffy is the Slayer in the finale, and there's this really poorly constructed metaphor where Joyce likens being the Slayer to being gay without saying it outright, And can't Buffy decide just to not be the Slayer? Stay in the closet? Their conversation ends on a really sour note, and they have this massive falling out. Joyce says in no unclear terms that Buffy can't return home if she leaves, which of course she has to save the world, so it's a big bummer. Anyway, I do have one last point on my season 2 list, number 6, superfluous things that I love. The first is that in this season, and it's just a small thing, Buffy has an episode where the band Chibo Mato is playing a set at the Bronze, and I just have to thank whoever put them onto the show because I am now a big fan of them. Shout out to Chibo Mato. The second point on the list of very superfluous things is, oh my god, I watched this season on DVD and they had the most bizarrely choreographed transitions between episodes. I hope I'm able to put them on the screen now. I scoured the internet and I couldn't find any recording of these as reference. So you have to deal with what I can cobble together. Each episode you click on, you travel to a different part of a graveyard and fly around statues and through mausoleums to get to your episode, which reveals itself out of a spooky mist. And I remember hearing in the commentary by Marty Noxon that even dusting vampires can be a huge ordeal in terms of cost. So I cannot imagine what kind of price tag these transition sequences cost the production. But I love them. It's like I'm playing one of those really bad DVD games that movies in like 2005 had. It feels like this big secret that I'm letting out. My third detail is something completely unrelated to the actual production, but occasionally while I was doing research, I would type in the various couples' names into Google and YouTube, and I just have to call out this Giles and Jenny fan cam. This person knew what they were doing, and it slays. I don't know what their ship name is, but I support it. Giley? And lastly, the thing I like most about this season was this. She fucking catches it in her hands! In her hands! And that's season 2. So when I approach the big themes addressed in season 3, I have like no clue. Season 3 seems more like a smorgasbord of the team's best and most offbeat ideas cobbled together in a way that somehow feels very cohesive, yet each episode can stand on its own. Like, thus far, I think season 3 has the best random watchability. Like, if you were to turn on cable television and land on an episode of Buffy in the year 2022, somehow, season 3 would give you the best of the best. There are an abundance of Monster of the Week episodes, but the best part is, none of them feel like filler. I mean, sure, for example, there's a random episode where Hansel and Gretel have fused into a demon that manipulates Sunnydale to near psychological self-destruction, but you still get a lot of great character moments through, such as seeing Willow's magical abilities develop, and you see Amy, who gets turned into a rat. I will get to that later, but the point is, the writers don't allocate episodes to be exclusively plot-driven or exclusively sideshow-driven. They're usually some mix of both, which is to the show's overall benefit. I have very few critiques for season 2 because honestly, its plot and themes are some of the strongest in the show's entire run. But occasionally I'd feel burnout from the constant underpinning of romance. Season 3 sidesteps that and allows for a flexibility of theme that feels unburdened from the necessity of romantic tragedy. Willow and Xander, because of some shenanigans they get up to this season, involve themselves and their respective partners in the fallout of heartbreak, but they're not pointlessly attached to this narrative for the entire season. Love is still around, and in many ways Buffy and Angel's story is a continuation of who they were together in season 2, but Angel's vacation to hell and back again seriously turns their dynamic on its head. Buffy is more rationally cautious of Angel and aware of her vulnerability when she's with him, and Angel is especially cognizant of his and Buffy's mortal differences, which becomes less of a hurdle he can overcome and more of a wall he'll be forced to confront as Buffy gets older, something that cannot be remedied or avoided. I can't say the overarching theme I fell on for season 3 was my own making because I have regularly perused the Buffy boards for various pieces of insight, but where season 1 is a lot about accepting one's destiny and for the layman, accepting oneself, and season 2 is about love and lust, I feel that season 3 is about facing one's future. I'm going to bring this back up as we explore various character beats moving forward, because we see it for Angel, we see it for Buffy, we see it for Willow, and even a little bit of Giles. Everyone is affected by the thought or the reality of their future in some way or another, and have to accept or compromise with that reality. The easiest place to start with this season is Buffy and Angel. The end of season 2, we saw Buffy effectively vanquish Angel by stabbing him and sending him into a demon hell dimension, and that was really wickedly cool and sad. But when you dive into season 3, immediately David Boreanaz is featured in the opening credit sequence for the first time ever. So it was sort of a big giveaway that his passing wasn't permanent. The writers attempt to undermine your assumptions about his return in the early episodes because at least 3 or 4 times you'll see Buffy having a dream where Angel is there talking to her. But I don't know. I was never convinced. No one can just be a dream image for an entire season. That would get very repetitive and very boring. In episode 4, Angel is brought back very unceremoniously at the end of the episode, I guess as a cliffhanger, and if you're wondering what mystical forces brought him back, we don't know. If you think they're going to be investigating season 3 of Buffy, you're wrong. They take that plot with them into Buffy's spin-off show, Angel, which I fully do not have the time to talk about now. But what you get of Angel is that he's essentially gone feral from his time in hell. He's naked, he's post-verbal, and when he first sees Buffy, he's so far gone mentally that he tries to attack her, not even recognizing who she is. Angel's sudden re-entry into Buffy's life is very strange. She's incredibly torn up about having lost him in the first place, or more accurately, having killed him, and I think anyone in her position would have reacted similarly, if not way, way worse. There's a lot of vitriol still hanging in the air regarding the person that is Angel, specifically from Xander, who I hate for the first half of season 3. I'll get to him when I get to him, okay? But you also have the likes of Giles, who understandably is recovering from the trauma of Angelus torturing him and killing his girlfriend. Everyone in the Buffy gang has seriously justified reasoning for hating and fearing Angel, which is why it makes sense for Buffy to keep his return secret. She doesn't tell anyone at first. She keeps him in this big open mausoleum that becomes a regular set for season 3. Slowly, Buffy is able to help him recover. In the meantime, I want to make note that Buffy was trying to move on from Angel, going so far as to date other, more normal boys from her high school. So the passion you see from season 2, the very Romeo and Juliet style romance that ultimately became fatal, has effectively disappeared. They're not even remotely blindly driven by love anymore. The romance that eventually does come back is a lot more rational, given they understand the rules and limits of how they can act. They're moderately more mature, and they better understand their differences as the vampire and as the Slayer. For now, the relationship focuses on the relatively celibate act of Angel's recovery, though for a couple of episodes there, the two of them practice some very relaxed, very suggestive Tai Chi positions, but other than that, Buffy is deliberately distant, and Angel doesn't immediately jump back into the pretense of a relationship. I had a hard time determining what their relationship was in these private meetings, and honestly, I think it's better just to focus on Buffy here and what she's feeling. She, of course, never stopped loving Angel, but there is a serious hesitancy at seeing him in the flesh again. Hesitant that he's not even the same person, that he may not feel the same way, hesitant about what this means for leading a more normal life, or what could happen if the rest of her friends and family found out. Not to mention the fact that for at least 3 episodes on Angel's return, she is dating a different boy named Scott. All of these factors push off the inevitable. In episode 7, Revelations, despite her better judgment, Buffy and Angel kiss for the first time since his return. Immediately, they consider this a mistake and they pull back, but because the writers just love crafting misunderstandings, they have Xander spot the kiss, and only the kiss, not even the reeling back part. Not only is Xander the worst character to spot them because of his anti-Angel bias, but he completely misses everything surrounding that kiss, both before and after. All the self-awareness and rationality that suggests Angel and Buffy are being cautious and platonic up to this point, it's never seen. Not only is this the reveal that Angel and Buffy are romantic again, but more importantly, it's the mere fact that Angel's returned in the first place. I'm looking at my notes, and I'm just wondering where is really the most appropriate place to talk about how much I hate Xander in this arc. To put it most tamely, Xander completely lacks control of his emotions and critical thinking skills when Angel is in the mix. I'm not saying what he feels isn't justified on some level, because he has experienced these same traumas and losses everyone else has in the Scooby Gang. Recoiling at the sight of Angel's return makes sense, and I honor that feeling. But what Xander does so distinctly, gratingly wrong is that his motivations aren't so simple as hating Angel for the greater welfare of humankind. But he poses himself that way, and what lies underneath is the residual yet strong resentment he holds for Angel effectively winning Buffy rather than him.
What gives you the right to suck face with your demon lover again?
It was an accident.
What, you just tripped and fell on his lips?
Every vindictive and antagonistic response that he throws at Buffy after the kiss reveal feels purely born out of those immature feelings, but he masks it as justified anger for what Angelus has destroyed, pretending justice means he can get revenge for losing a girl he never had. This is envy in one of the ugliest forms I've ever seen it on scripted TV. You can't tell me Xander spotting Buffy and Angel kissing wasn't a deliberate move on the writer's part to twist the knife of a plotline that otherwise should have disappeared in the last season. And the worst part of Xander's behavior is that he feels righteous in his negative response. He lacks the cognizance that Willow and Giles have to step outside of their feelings and understand Buffy's circumstances. Maybe it's a tribute to Giles' age, but he's able to understand what Buffy is going through while still expressing how thoroughly pissed off he is and admonishing her in the process. Similarly, it may be because Willow is still an emotional wallflower, but she first holds on to the fact that Buffy is an important person to her instead of unfeelingly condemning her behavior. This is called empathy, not forgiveness. And Xander's lack of empathy, multiplied by his vindictive incel behavior masked as justice, is frankly really gross. It makes him really irredeemable. The way he treats Buffy in the aftermath of the reveal is completely unforgivable. He treats her like the dirt under his shoe for nursing Angel back to health. The thing is, Xander's immediate response upon spotting the kiss is leaving without being noticed, and immediately tattling to the rest of the Scooby Gang. When Buffy later returns to the library alone, they hold an intervention for her. Xander is convinced that Buffy's fallen into the same toxic love pattern she had with Angel in season 2, and naturally has skewed what he saw to fit the narrative. The worst part is that Buffy doesn't have the vocabulary here to really defend herself. She can't describe the complex nuances of how she feels at Angel's return, because everyone thinks she's head over heels for him and fibbing to save face. Not to mention she hardly can hold the floor during the intervention because Xander's horrid, envious behavior has turned to a wrathful call to action to find and kill Angel. This is a big plot point in the episode, and I'm going to return to it later, but God, do you ever get so pinned up about a girl you didn't date that you want to kill her boyfriend? Because I don't think that's normal. No. What I can say is Buffy does pull herself together enough to call out Xander for his actual behavior.
You would just love an excuse to hurt him, wouldn't you?
I don't need an excuse. I think lots of dead people actually constitutes a reason.
Right. This is all nobility. I mean, this has nothing to do with jealousy.
I'm telling you guys, Xander is like a legitimate bad friend. He's like an antagonist in my eyes. And that's not even mentioning the really shitty way he treats Buffy in episode 2 of season 3. And I don't really have enough time to talk about that, unfortunately. He does call Buffy an idiot, though, in that episode, with that same flavor of false bravado he has in the intervention. It's just disgusting. For all those reasons, I think Buffy's writers spent a lot of time making Xander's character more complex than your average pining best friend, when really, they could have kept with the status quo and maintained a show of the same quality, so I guess I have to commend them on that part. I don't really see a lot of critical writing around Xander, and I guess it's because he is the normal one out of the bunch, and by today's standards, he's just a prototypical nice guy with all of the connotations that carries, so he's not really a revolutionary archetype in today's influx of scripted TV. I'd also say he suffers from the same pitfalls a lot of annoying male characters fall into, where he doesn't get proper comeuppance for just how much of an asshole he is. Like, yes, Xander faces consequences for being a hypocrite in entirely different, separate circumstances, but concerning Buffy, he never has to apologize. At the end of this same episode, after the fighting is wrapped up, Buffy plainly asks if the two of them are cool, to which he says yes, and he tells her he trusts her, but we don't see any of that growth or that understanding play out on screen between the two of them because they were busy fighting a homicidal British lady. More on her later. But the point is that regarding Buffy, Xander gets off scot-free. It feels like an easy out for otherwise dangerous and non-friend-like behavior. Moving back to Buffy and Angel, the next episode we briefly see Spike, so yay! He doesn't make any other appearances in this season, but I mention them because unlike everyone else who eventually believes Buffy at her word, that she and Angel aren't romantically inclined, Spike calls out their sappy pining. Spike is still as chaotic and evil as ever, but he's notably very forlorn and pathetic at the start of this episode because Drusilla broke up with him for his betrayal at the end of season 2. Remember how he sabotaged the apocalypse? Yeah. Anyway, the plot isn't super relevant, but he calls out Buffy and Angel's denial of their attraction for what it is, saying, I may be love's bitch, but at least I'm man enough to admit it. At the end of the episode, Spike stops being pathetic and resolutely decides to win Drusilla back, leaving town again with that familiar bravado he used to possess. Meanwhile, Angel and Buffy have to face their feelings that they've otherwise buried. I'm skipping over a lot of plot here, mainly to talk about the Buffy and Angel romance, but without much fanfare, the two of them become closer on a romantic level, falling less in that weird category of Buffy helping Angel recuperate from an emotional distance. They basically admit their feelings in the episode titled Amends, which I won't go over, but it's that episode where Buffy has really iconically bad bangs, which I object to. In the year 2022, I can confidently say that statistically there must be at least one fashionable Gen Z TikTok girl with that haircut, and I'm sure she sports it very well. I simply cannot imagine otherwise. By episode 14, they're casually kissing and consider themselves romantically involved, and they're pretty stable for like 6 episodes, mainly because Angel isn't really part of the plot. Buffy might go to him and they'll coordinate on a strategy to take down the bad guy or have a normal conversation one-on-one, but nothing happens that affects the relationship beyond quietly making it stronger. That is until episode 19, Choices. I think what they do with Angel from this point forward is really smart, because in terms of the plot, Angel doesn't offer much that's significant anymore. For the gang, he's of course an invaluable tool to help get the edge on bad guys, but in terms of propelling drama and angst amongst the Scoobies, Angel's role was relatively front-loaded in season 3 with his dramatic revival from hell. After the dust settles, he's just there. So when you're not accidentally being turned into an evil vampire and you're not recovering from your time in hell, and you're not standing around as a catalyst for Buffy's fallout with her friends, there's really nothing left to do beyond be a good boyfriend, and that's just boring. Angel has to be there to cause some strife from a writer's perspective, or he's dead weight. So understandably, when eventually facing off against the big bad of the season, a man who will come to know as the Mayor, we start to see what Angel's next big wrench will be for Buffy. And unfortunately, it's his last for this particular series. For context, the Mayor is relatively lucid at his best and manically perky at his worst, and I can't really portray what he says any better than he can.
God, you kids, you know, you don't like to think about the future. You don't like to make plans. I mean, come on, what kind of a life can you offer her? I don't see a lot of Sunday picnics in the offing. She's skulking in the shadows, hiding from the sun. She's a blossoming young girl, and you want to keep her from the life she should have until it's passed her by. And by God, I think that's a little selfish.
I mean, this type of relationship difference was one of the big points of contention in another vampire-human romance later down the line, that being Stephenie Meyer's Twilight. But the mythologies for vampirism between those series are entirely different, so Bella can somewhat reasonably propose that she be turned into a vampire to solve their problem, whereas for Buffy, being turned means death, plain and simple. There's no possibility for solving the problem of contradicting mortalities with her and Angel. Buffy is relatively unaffected by the Mayor's rhetoric, but Angel, having apparently thought about this for a long time, takes this to heart, despite the Mayor being evil. The fun thing about the big bads is, yes, they want to bring on an apocalypse of some kind, but they often make damn good points every now and then. They're not absent of logic. To make matters worse, Buffy's mom, Joyce Summers, approaches Angel alone in the next episode, and she mentions her concern of their relationship. Joyce isn't even angry or confrontational, but she's calm and resolute on the understanding that her daughter is very young. Joyce could be worried about the logistics of Angel's curse, which would be entirely reasonable to bring up on its own, but she doesn't even mention that. More poignantly, she only talks about how she worries about the stark differences between Angel and Buffy, of the possible repercussions that a real relationship between them could cause down the line. Very correctly, Joyce talks honestly about how Buffy is a young girl just starting out in the world. Without having to say so, there is an understanding between Angel and Joyce of what Buffy's life would look like if she were chained down to an immortal demon boyfriend, that she wouldn't be able to experience true joy or happiness in the daylight, wouldn't be able to start a family if she wanted to, or die happy and old with her partner. The reality of the relationship and what would be in store for them in the future is a far more real and present danger than Angel losing a soul, because one is preventable while the other is the inevitable passage of time. Not long after this scene, and rather randomly, Angel breaks up with Buffy while they're patrolling in Sunnydale's sewers, of all places. In the same breath that Buffy is heartbroken, Angel tries to be strong and cut ties, and tells her he's leaving town once the Mayor business is wrapped up, which he later does, keeping true to his word. Of course, it's a surprise and devastating for Buffy, but later when Willow is consoling her about the breakup, Buffy does admit that Angel is right, despite how much she resents it and cries over him. Because the writers can't stand to have Angel and Buffy on bad terms before the finale, the two of them do come to a quiet resolution. Angel shows up to Buffy's prom and they have a last dance to the Sunday's cover of Wild Horses, which is the most beautiful cover and song to ever exist. I'm being dramatic, but I do really love it. And that's the end of their relationship. I'd actually say it was a pretty anticlimactic ending, all things considered. I can't imagine if this breakup occurred in season 2. I'm pretty sure Buffy would have done something incredibly stupid to keep him, but the relationship has naturally reached its end. Now I want to move back to the beginning of season 3 again. That was just one major plot arc that I wanted to cover. Most of the relationship didn't address the plot, mostly because I ignored it, but now we're going to dive into the most important catalyst of season 3. Not the mayor. So I'm talking about Faith. In short, if you remember us talking about Kendra, the second Slayer, I mentioned the fact that unfortunately she died, and that meant she had to be replaced. And in walks Faith, who I have so many notes for, so I'm not sure I'm gonna get to them all, but I'm gonna try. In short, Faith is rebellious. She's a little punk, a little white trash, forever flippant, and under the surface, very emotionally bruised. The best way I can describe her is this. If Kendra's dutiful and straight-laced image were meant to serve as a foil to Buffy and make Buffy look rough around the edges, Faith swings to the other side of the Slayer spectrum. This is Buffy. Next to Faith, Buffy is positively a girl's girl, a stickler for the rules, practically boring by comparison. My favorite and the most obvious evidence of this comes from the costuming department, because anytime Faith is especially rugged or out of line, Buffy is there looking feminine, wearing a cute skirt, holding a purse, the works. Basically, non-Slayer appropriate attire. Faith is introduced in the 3rd episode of season 3, Faith, Hope, and Trick. And the short explanation we get for her arrival is that the original Watcher she had was brutally murdered by some powerful vampire gang, and Faith shows up in Sunnydale to escape her emotional demons while also escaping her real demons. The monster that's chasing her isn't important. He dies in the same episode he's introduced, but what is important is that you immediately understand Faith hides all of her trauma under an evergreen false bravado, which gets old fast. But the good news is that Faith, by virtue of being the second Slayer, is also an immediate satellite member of the Scooby Gang. They're on good terms. Notably, however, she's not a true friend of anyone in the group, only a strong ally, which is why I say satellite member rather than full-fledged member. It's similar to Angel's role, but Angel benefits from being in love with the protagonist, so at least he has a support system. Faith notably doesn't. For a while, she'll pop in and out of episodes whenever the plot calls for it, but the next really pivotal episode for Faith is episode 7, Revelations. As mentioned, Faith's Watcher died before the events of Faith's arrival, so she's due a new one any day now. While it would probably be very convenient for Giles to assume the role, the Watchers Council doesn't agree, thinking Watchers and Slayers should be 1-to-1. Enter Gwendolyn Post, Faith's new Watcher, who isn't super relevant to the overarching plot beyond this episode, but she throws enough of the cast off balance that it leaves some echoes of mistrust in Faith, I think. Gwendolyn Post is this especially high-strung, very pompous, and frustratingly intelligent British woman who she's just the absolute worst kind of academic that you could ever meet. With Giles, you understand he was very, straight-laced at the beginning of the series, but he was never condescending or quietly cruel in the way that Gwendolyn Post effortlessly is. She looks down upon everything on her first arrival. In fact, it stays that way throughout the whole episode. Even Giles, who you come to realize has actually loosened up a lot since the very first episode of season 1. More than ever, because of his contrast to Gwen, you can see just how much he and the rest of the Scooby Gang have gelled, how they complement each other's strengths and trust each other to fight evil. If Gwendolyn became Buffy's Watcher, they probably would have butt heads and settled to some agreement, but with Faith, they obviously don't see eye to eye at all. Faith has this very obvious mistrust and dislike of authority, which understandable, but at this point in the series, Faith isn't detrimentally rebellious. They're still able to communicate without destroying each other, which feels miraculous. To give away the plot in this episode, Gwendolyn Post isn't actually part of the Watchers Council anymore. She was fired on account of being very evil, but the message to Giles got lost in the mail or something. The point is, she causes more chaos and sows seeds of doubt between Faith and the others. Even more importantly, this is the same episode where Xander catches Buffy and Angel kissing. So if you recall, there's this entire intervention sequence where Xander spews hate at her, Giles admonishes her, and Willow is being timid and concerned, as per usual. But Faith is not invited to that intervention. So it's important to remember that Xander is feeling envy and hate towards Buffy, towards Angel, and rather than stewing on his feelings or venting to a friend like a normal person, he takes his rage and uses it to manipulate Faith and potentially hurt Angel. Let me explain that. Just previous to the intervention, Buffy and Faith are patrolling downtown. Faith lightly asks some questions about Buffy's relationship with Angel, but Buffy kind of roughly brushes her off.
Look, Faith, all of the Angel issues are still kind of with me, so if you don't mind, I'd rather not.
And while Faith is not one to show feeling, I think this cold shoulder hurts her a bit. At first it feels like a very inconsequential scene, but I think it was one of those moments where Buffy really could have opened up to Faith and gotten close to her, but she doesn't. His sense of separation or seclusion from the group is later emphasized when Gwendolyn tells Faith very inaccurately that everyone else is having a secret meeting, whereupon Faith remarks that I guess that doesn't include me. Faith already feels distant, but these small moments are really pivotal in making her feel even more alone. And this is the part where Xander really puts his shitty behavior on full, violent display, which I couldn't really explain in depth before. The next person Faith sees after her meeting with Gwendolyn is Xander, and in his rage and envious contempt for Angel's mere existence, he tells her that Angel is holding onto an ancient evil artifact, which is true. He's holding onto this glove that could potentially bring about the end of the world if someone wore it, but what Xander doesn't say is Angel is holding it for Buffy and the Scooby Gang. Xander is so caught up in his own envy that he deliberately manipulates Faith, a weapon, to think Angel's evil because he wants Faith to slay him. And I get it, Angelus terrorized you and your friends and murdered some people, but Xander knows this is Angel, not Angelus, and understands the nuances of separation between each identity. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What this does for Faith on the other end is push her further into this territory of not being a friend, but a weapon to be used, to be manipulated. She likes to kill vampires, sure, but it goes without saying that spurring her on in this direction will only cause her to be alienated from the cast after the fact, whether she succeeds in killing Angel or not. Xander is leading her astray for his own cause. The writers try to subtly save face for Xander a bit later on in the episode because he and Faith get separated, and in doing so, Xander faces a brief moment of lucidity from his wrath and admits how he cruelly twisted Faith to cause a conflict. So do you remember how Gwendolyn posed as evil? So when Giles tells Gwen that Angel has the glove, she knocks him out. Because it turns out the only reason Gwendolyn arrived in the first place was to gain intel on this glove and come to possess it, to wear it for herself. So she knocks out Giles and arrives at the mausoleum where Angel lives, and then she encounters Faith. I can't remember where Buffy has been while all this is happening, but by this point she's also arrived at Angel's mausoleum, and here ensues the first of many Buffy versus Faith girl fights, and oh my god, these are some of the best in this series. We saw a hint of this in season 2 when Buffy and Kendra had a cat fight, but nothing to this level. Importantly, Buffy tries to talk it out with Faith first, but Faith has already been set on the path of slaying the vampire and saving the day. Faith throws the first punch, and what follows is a violent roller coaster of one girl getting an edge over the other, back and forth, and there's a lot of sound effects and stumbling around. There are a few set changes, a lot of fun props. The set designers and choreographers really went to town for this one. At one point, you do see an expression on Faith's face where she may be unsure about fighting, but the thing about Faith is she doesn't let go of her convictions. Very much to her detriment, she has way too much personal pride to admit when she's wrong. Regardless of whether her behavior is correct, she's going to follow through with something until it's finished. So even when she may realize that this fight means nothing, or she's been led astray by Xander and Gwendolyn, she doesn't stop because she doesn't want to look weak. Her pride doesn't rely on her winning every fight necessarily because she knows she can always get vengeance another day, and it doesn't rely on her being morally correct in the aftermath of the confrontation either. Faith fully embraces the chaos that surrounds her, physically speaking, and makes that her identity. Oh my god, I got through it. But she doesn't want to look mentally and emotionally weak to those around her. It's why when Buffy and the others try to bond with her or appeal to her humanity, she shuts them down. For Faith, living in solitude and having no friends isn't necessarily what she wants in life, but having to own up to her personal failings is a hurdle that she cannot possibly face. It would mean becoming vulnerable, and vulnerability only leads to betrayal or loss in her eyes. And I do think it's that point earlier in the episode where Buffy rebuffs Faith's questions about Angel that Faith's mentality begins her downward descent. It's not really Buffy's fault because it was a very mundane social transaction, but it's one of those instances where a person could look back and question, What if I had said something else? In the end, neither of them win the fight because Gwendolyn is able to locate and don the glove, after which she can throw around lightning and destroy things. But Buffy manages to cut off Gwen's arm in retaliation, and then a lightning bolt strikes down Gwen, destroying her and sending her into some kind of nether realm, I'm assuming. So ultimately, this is just another Monster of the Week style episode. But what remains after the fight are strong echoes of mixed feelings and discontent, as well as stark differences in views. The days after the conflict, Buffy tries to smooth things over with Faith at her apartment, but it becomes obvious that Faith wasn't simply led astray by Gwen's word. I think Faith does want there to be a resolution, but she is so stuck in the decision she made that she deliberately avoids seeing eye to eye with Buffy. She stays true to her conviction that all vampires should be slain and about her actions taken the night before, and in that failure to meet in the middle, their relationship is significantly tarnished. Maybe she's right on some level, and Angel shouldn't be an exception to the rule. And if so, that just means there's this plain, unavoidable conflict of interest between Slayers. Angel can neither be alive or dead for these girls to reasonably move forward. I want to briefly pause between episodes and say, yes, I haven't really discussed the mayor in full. We're about to get to him. I will say, however, that the mayor's interactions with the Scooby Gang really only pick up near the end of the season. The earlier episodes, the mayor is likely doing something adjacent to the Monster of the Week, or is endorsing them in some way, or is benefiting from the predicament in another way. A good example of this is in episode 6, Band Candy, where Giles' old buddy Ethan Rayne comes back to town and gives chocolate bars to all the adults in Sunnydale, whereupon eating them makes them act like teenagers and makes them cause chaos. That in itself is a good one-off episode, but in the grand scheme of things, this chaos is meant to serve as a distraction so the mayor and his minions can collect babies and sacrifice them to a sewer demon. Yeah, that one's kind of heavy. In fact, many of these other episodes conveniently leave out the mayor, to the point that the Scooby Gang doesn't realize the mayor is evil until episode 15, Consequences, which we're about to get to. Episode 14 and 15 go hand in hand regarding Faith's downfall, and this all leads to her eventual alliance with the mayor. Yeah, Faith goes bad. So episode 14 is called Bad Girls. We start this episode with Faith's actual new watcher showing up to town, Wesley Wyndham Price. And oh my god, on the spectrum of dorky to pompous watchers, Wesley is possibly the most dorky person alive. He's similar to Giles season 1, but at least Giles season 1 had some authority about him. Meanwhile, Wesley is blatantly walked all over. Nobody in the entire cast appreciates Wesley's existence. Buffy doesn't care for him, Giles can't even humor the guy's authority, and Faith all but ignores him. The important traits to list for Wesley are that he's very dorky, he's a stickler for the rules, and his genuine lack of experiences make him fully unequipped to handle his position. He says he's killed 2 vampires, I believe, but within very controlled environments, to the point that calling it slaying feels like a lie. His presence conveniently also gives Giles plenty of opportunity to look cool and down with the kids. At one point, the 2 watchers are fencing, and while Wesley tries his best to keep up, Giles effortlessly beats him while talking to someone else. Seemingly in contradiction to the new walking rulebook, while slaying, Faith convinces Buffy to indulge in the Slayer's carnal desire to kill, and they sweep an entire vampire lair, which is very out of the norm for Buffy. Usually she plays the defensive rather than pursue the negligent offensive. Also, obviously, Faith and Buffy are back on talking terms. I don't think they ever actually stopped talking or coordinating patrols. In fact, they're relatively friendly, but there's a new air to Faith that feels a bit disingenuous, and she's a bit more rough around the edges. What follows after successfully slaying an entire vampire nest is that Faith convinces Buffy it's cool to listen to those instincts and live above the law. It's an adrenaline high, something that Faith on multiple occasions describes as a kind of aphrodisiac for the Slayer. Way back in the first episode where she is introduced, she plainly explains to the Scooby Gang that she gets really horny after slayage, to which Buffy only responds that she craves a low-fat yogurt. Also, I apologize to everybody in my personal life who had to hear me say the word horny. Buffy and Bad Girls get so drunk off of Faith's own sense of fun and power that she skips school to hang out with her, to start fights and dance sexually at the Bronze. At seemingly their worst, Buffy and Faith break into a weapons store at night and steal some fancy crossbows and knives. This doesn't end so well, and the 2 of them are arrested, but to make matters worse, when they're in the cop car, they intentionally cause a wreck to escape out of the back seat. date, after which Buffy finally starts to realize this behavior maybe isn't okay. So the two of them are still mucking about Sunnydale's alleyways at night, but Buffy is actively trying to make Faith cool off, and Faith isn't really having it. Before they can really settle down, they're ambushed by a few random vampires who are loyal to a monster of the week named Balthazar. Balthazar is not relevant. They slay those vampires with ease. But here's the dramatic bit. So the mayor has this assistant named Alan Finch, and Alan Finch is fully human. He's riding along with all the mayor's evil plans up to this point in the season, but I think it's mostly out of fear because Alan Finch seems like a nice enough man, just scared into submission. In Bad Girls, the mayor audibly plans and alludes to bringing on the apocalypse, and Alan thinks it's high time to get out of there. From what we know, Alan Finch was actually trying to find the Scooby Gang and warn them about the oncoming doom, but I'm not sure if that was really confirmed in the script at all. Maybe later on. But what happens is, when he finds Faith and Buffy, it's in the alley at night. The Slayers have just killed off Balthazar's vampires one by one, and unfortunately, getting highly caught up in the moment, Faith mistakes Alan Finch for a vampire and stabs him in the chest. Almost immediately he collapses against a dumpster and dies. This is a massive, massive mistake on Faith's part. Slayers are not supposed to kill humans for any reason. It isn't considered slaying, it's just plain murder. Now, you remember how Faith, to her detriment, sticks to her convictions and actions? Yeah. Unfortunately, this is one of those instances, and it's the worst of its kind. In the moment, it seems like Faith is scared and regretful of what she's done, but she almost immediately 180s. Horrified, for the rest of the episode, Buffy tries to convince Faith that this isn't okay and that she has to turn herself into the police and face her crimes, rightfully noting that the Slayer isn't the same as being a killer. But Faith has immediately regressed into this aggressive, solitary, self-protective mode. Instead of being reflective, she doubles down on this carnal power of being a vampire slayer, going so far as to claim that she is above the law, that she can do what she wants when she wants. At her worst, and at the end of Bad Girls, when Buffy pleads to her about Alan's death, Faith blithely, hauntingly tells Buffy that she doesn't care. How authentic she feels about that at the time is really hard to gauge, because she sticks to her guns for quite a while into the season's finale. After the fact, I feel it becomes obvious that Faith's derision and self-propelled chaos is parallel to her shame and her guilt and her fear, because the longer she goes on, and the more evil she presents herself as, the more you get the sense that Faith is deliberately masking her shame. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but sort of like how Faith fought Buffy in the Gwendolyn episode, Faith is simply pushing forward with violence and hate, because to rewind and acknowledge her own shortcomings and mistakes would be to show weakness. Posing oneself as evil, to go so far as to join an apocalypse-seeking mayor, it's just very dramatic denial. Claiming yourself as evil and effectively absolving yourself as human is to theoretically absolve yourself of the guilt of your actions. In a very real sense, I think Faith is trying to pursue her own Angelus form, to create her own Mr. Hyde persona, but she cannot escape it, at least not in the end. In episode 15, Consequences, Buffy is still keeping Faith's murder a secret and is still trying to plead with her to see reason. At one point, she goes to Faith's apartment and describes how she knows how Faith feels. To quote Buffy, it's dirty, like something creeped inside you and you can't get it out, and you keep hoping it was just some nightmare, but it wasn't. Unquote. But Faith isn't listening and flippantly disregards the way Buffy tries to connect with her. She is using her power and separation from society as a kind of armor, and not long after the scene, Faith attempts to use Alan's murder as a weapon against Buffy. Later on, while Buffy isn't around, Faith twists the scene to Giles and claims Buffy was the one to kill Alan. Faith leaves so Giles can reprimand Buffy, immediately after which Giles admits he knew Faith was lying, and Faith is in fact a very bad liar.
She's unstable, Buffy. She's utterly unable to accept responsibility.
She's freaking. So then we just have to help her deal, right?
She's in denial. There is no help for her until she admits what happened.
Now, do you remember the fact that Wesley exists? Yeah, so he eavesdrops on their conversation and hears about Faith's actions. This is very bad news for everyone involved because he tattletales to the actual Watchers Council. In another scene, Angel, who's already suspicious that Buffy and Faith are involved in the Alan murder, ambushes Faith and drags her back to his museum, chaining her up. He lets Buffy know of his actions, and she's like, yeah, sure, do your thing, I don't care. My earlier comparison between Angel and Faith is actually something the show explores with a lot of depth because Angel has a talk with Faith. Up to this point, nobody has been able to penetrate Faith's exterior, but Angel gets substantially closer by comparison. He says to her, and quote, I mean, to kill without remorse is to feel like a god. But you're not a god. You're not much more than a child. Going down this path will ruin you. You can't imagine the price for true evil." Unquote. And sure, Buffy and Giles can try to understand what she's going through, but only Angel really understands, and he understands better than her because he's had to live with that guilt 100-fold, if not more.
If you can trust us, Faith, this can all change. You don't have to disappear into the darkness.
But just as you think Angel is getting through to her, Wesley intervenes with the Watchers Council and detains Faith, sending her back to square one. If not square negative one, because Wesley. Naturally, because he's incompetent, Wesley doesn't detain Faith for long, and she escapes. I'll spare you the details of the rest of the episode, but Faith is now an official baddie. All ties have been severed between her and the Scooby Gang, who never properly showed her compassion to begin with. Moving on, I'm not going to talk in depth about episode 17, Enemies, but it does feature Faith heavily, so I want to touch on a few character beats. She's fully evil by this point, but the gang doesn't know she's bad fully, so under the mayor's instruction, she tries to enlist the help of Angelus. Yes, Angelus, not Angel. To explain, Faith laughably tries to hook up with Angel so that by having sex with him, he will lose his soul again, and Angel straight up turns her down. The whole episode's plot is actually about how Angel briefly turns into Angelus, but it's actually just a big ruse, so it doesn't really matter. I don't really feel the need to go over it. What I will say is that on the subject of Faith, in the climax of the episode, when Buffy and Angel face off against Faith, she aggressively laments how everything in the world is always about Buffy. That Buffy gets all the credit as a Slayer and Faith is sidelined. Which is true because it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show. The world will revolve around her. Understandably. I want to popcorn over to episode 18, Earshot, very briefly. This episode is super irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but Buffy briefly contracts telepathy in this episode, and I wanted to highlight an interesting thought from Oz, of all people. We haven't actually talked about Oz much yet. But at one point, when Buffy is listening in on his thoughts, he thinks, quote, "I am my thoughts. If they exist in her, Buffy contains everything that is me. She becomes me. I cease to exist." Unquote. And obviously this is first and foremost a joke from the writers to show how Oz, while he's very quiet and unaffected on the outside, is casually a philosopher on the inside. But I really found it a powerful idea, and I wanted to see if anybody on the internet thought similarly. So I cannot take credit at all for this theory, but I really wanted to highlight this post from Tumblr user Her Insect Reflection, who writes this. Faith presents herself as the dark side of Buffy, as someone who does all the things that Buffy wants to do, but represses. You can debate how true this exactly is, but let's assume it is. If what Faith claims is true, everything that Faith thinks and feels exists within Buffy. Then as Oz says, Faith ceases to exist. Buffy contains everything that is her, and becomes her. Faith is subsumed inside another. And of course she is. She is Buffy's shadow. She cannot exist without Buffy. She is not designed to. They then incorporate a quote from this same episode from Othello, referencing Iago. It's like he's not really a person. He's the dark half of Othello himself. The fact that these two sentiments are woven into the same episode really solidifies for me that these ideas were intentional, despite the fact that Faith isn't present in the episode at all. To continue quoting their theory, Faith cannot achieve personhood while she continues to define herself entirely in relation to Buffy, which is a pattern she is trapped in because the narrative itself demands that she does. She is the dark half of Buffy. Everything that she is exists within Buffy, and she ceases to exist. Unquote. And I don't really know if I can expand significantly on their theory, but after I read this, I felt really compelled and reconsidered Faith's behavior in Enemies, where she is essentially lashing out in the worst possible way, trying to etch out her own corner in the world where Buffy cannot reach. Something I haven't mentioned up to this point is the Mayor and Faith, once they became allies, are not merely allies. They have this very strange father-daughter bond which grows as the season persists. This becomes very important. The Mayor, by virtue of being this very false shell of a human, experiences nearly zero real human emotion outside of the occasional hiccup of evil which betrays his genial exterior. But with Faith, what starts out as this standard evil-person alliance very subtly softens and changes. At one point in a previous episode, the Mayor buys Faith a fancy apartment, lifting her out of the hovel of her old place. He gives her a PlayStation, I think, and he showers her with other gifts, including weapons. The false positivity and charisma the Mayor exudes, somehow along the way, is superseded by genuine human care for Faith, where in every other way, both physical and mental, the Mayor has transformed himself into the non-human This relationship they've nurtured sticks itself firm within the mayor's psyche. He doesn't even care to fight or undo it. I'd go so far as to say that he loves her unconditionally. I will say by this point, the viewer starts to learn that the mayor's big evil goal for this season isn't actually just to cause simple chaos and destruction. No, the mayor seeks to become a pure demon and engages in various transformative rituals throughout the season to prepare his body as a vessel, such as making himself invincible. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit. Then we get to the finale, and yes, I'm skipping the prom. And yes, I'm also skipping the landmark episodes of Doppelgangland and The Wish. I'm probably going to get to them in a later episode when I talk about Anya, but for now, I'm not going to cover them. I'm sorry, but we'll get there. Rest assured, however, I still have a section in this review dedicated to Willow and Xander in Season 3 and what they've been doing this whole season besides being mean to Buffy. I'll get to it later as well. Graduation Day Part 1 and Part 2 are the finale episodes of Season 3, and Part 1 is markedly the conclusion of the Faith plot for Season 3. I'll talk about this with some depth. So, in previous episodes, the Scooby Gang has caught word that the mayor's big transformation into the demon Alvacan, also known as the Ascension, is set to occur on graduation day itself. And to give a little insight from the mayor's perspective as to why, it's because he needs a big meal when the transformation takes place. So he's conniving to munch on the graduating class to confirm his strength and bring about chaos, etc. To jump back into a point I glossed over a minute or so ago, the mayor wishes to become a pure demon. We learn in Part 1 that the run-of-the-mill demons we see from episode to episode are merely partial demons. To quote, they're tainted human hybrids, like vampires. The Ascension means that a human becomes pure demon. They're different. Unquote. In fact, the last Ascension to occur 800 years prior completely destroyed the town with which it occurred. And the demon itself was only able to be destroyed by, getting hit by a volcano's eruption somehow. Can't remember the logistics, but it happened. But the Scooby Gang isn't able to fully focus on preparing for the Ascension yet because one night, when Buffy and Angel are standing around in public, Faith from afar shoots Angel with a poison arrow, which could prove deadly if left untreated. I mention this because as they are plotting to find a cure and heal Angel, Wesley, who's still around, forbids them to follow through with that plan. But the rest of the gang is not having it. When they dissent, Wesley calls their actions mutiny, and the others simply accept it. Wesley, by and large, has been the sole voice of the Watchers Council, and nobody trusts him, and his influence is very weak, so this was bound to happen. In effect, by turning their backs on Wesley, they are turning their backs on the Council and ultimately severing ties, which, good. The Watchers Council sucks. Even Giles stays with the Scooby Gang. As a side note, Willow is working on a spell to hopefully cure Angel. Meanwhile, Buffy takes action and ambushes Faith's apartment, which, great, but also I have no idea where the good guys even attained the information of where she lived. But anyway, the quality of the scene is chef's kiss. Is that how I literally tried to do a chef's kiss and I don't know if I did it right? Oh well. Anyway, the quality of the choreography and each character's fighting style is pitch perfect, very similar to their last fight in Revelations, just expanded upon. They forcibly move their fight from Faith's apartment to Faith's balcony, and ultimately Buffy wins out over Faith by stabbing her in the stomach with her own knife. Buffy specifically does this because Willow's spell cure calls for the blood of the person who inflicted the poison, or blood at the very least. But instead of allowing Buffy to take her blood, Faith very dramatically throws herself off the balcony and lands in the bed of a passing truck, traveling off to who knows where in a near-death state, so no cure is available yet. When Buffy returns fruitless to Angel's bedside, he's become delusional. He's having hallucinations. Instead of letting him die like that, Buffy shoos her friends away and essentially coerces Angel to suck on her blood, which can cure him. Don't ask me how, it just does. Anyway, in his psychosis, he relents and feeds on her. I don't think he would have done that in any other circumstance. And I think this is one of those transactions that everyone who watches the show expected to happen eventually. Granted, we all thought it would be Angelus feeding on Buffy, maybe in season 2, and not Angel, but the worst of the worst has somehow come true, and everyone involved has to face the repercussions of their actions. I wouldn't necessarily describe Angel and Buffy's relationship as abusive by any means, but what Buffy and Angel are is volatile. They are not good for one another for practical reasons, for emotional reasons, for the risks inherent to their being together, both short and long term. And finally, we see in the flesh how their connection could potentially prove fatal. Luckily, when Angel eventually becomes lucid again, he pulls off Buffy successfully, but she becomes very ill. I think she's unconscious, and he rushes her to a hospital. This is an interesting scene because Faith is revealed to be in the hospital as well, and the mayor is watching over her. Meanwhile, Buffy and Angel are like just a room over. What occurs after that point is a confrontation of words between the boys, and for the first time, the mayor's false exterior falters, and he shows himself as a genuine, violent, evil threat to Angel. He calls her Angel's whore, which, to keep with the running theme, I'm sorry to everybody in my personal life who just heard me say the word whore so grossly. It's just weird. But anyway, there was a scene earlier in the same episode where the mayor sees Giles too, and he very sinisterly plainly says he's going to eat Buffy. It's played off in the same really scary way, but you know, in retrospect, I just
I'm gonna eat her.
I'm gonna eat her. Besides that, I'm sorry, I nearly just cried just now. Buffy has a very serene dream sequence, and Faith is also there. There's no fighting, no ill will or hostility. All their wounds have disappeared miraculously. It's a dream. What do you expect? And they're standing in a very light, beautiful, airy room. The thing is, yes, this is very much Faith's actress, but I'm not 100% certain it's Faith the character, because she holds a lot of information about the future that otherwise is impossible to know. It's probable that some higher power just shoved certain ideas into her head, which ultimately is fine, because Faith will be staying in a semi-permanent coma, so she's not going to be able to use the future things she knows to her benefit. By the time she does come out of it, those little prophecies aren't even her concern. She does say the phrase "Little Miss Muffet counting down from 730," which is a very silly nothing burger of a statement, but it actually foretells some events later on in season 5, which feels very much like the writers pompously patting themselves in the back, like, haha, we know what we're going to write later on. The scene doesn't last much longer than that. We have now entered the last phase of the finale, which is when all the characters prepare for their final battle with the mayor during his ascension. I just want to come out and say it, the best seasons of Buffy have incredible finales, and season 3 is squarely one of those stellar examples. At the start, it's posed as the fact that Buffy has this crazy plan they're following through with, but the viewer isn't allowed to know about it until the final conflict actually occurs. And dear lord, is it actually kind of nuts? On their own, every main character is seen or heard talking with various students in the graduating class who have been featured in previous episodes. This means the ditzy popular girl Harmony, the dorky short kid Jonathan, gay Larry, and Willow's jock friend Percy, all of whom I've glossed over significantly. Truly, they are not that important regarding the previous plots, but they are students we've seen. On the day of the Ascension, the mayor is set to perform the commencement speech, and the most evil thing he does in the entire episode is subject those graduating students to a long, boring speech, rather than immediately getting to the transformation and murder. Luckily, finally he does the dang thing, and my god, the graphics for the snake monster are awful. In almost every other circumstance, I can excuse the graphics, or it might seem pretty passable for its time, but my god, they really did not have the budget for a monster to be on screen for more than a second. But the big twist that makes this season so fucking cool is the entire graduating class has unified in support of slaying the mayor. Underneath their graduating garb are crossbows, knives, maces, the works. Because there's not enough chaos going on, I guess, a full eclipse is also happening during the graduation event, so on top of a massive snake demon, tons of the mayor's vampire lackeys are crowding the students from behind. Rest assured, there is chaos everywhere, but the students have been exceptionally equipped and divided into teams to handle every side, so it's not just a big student buffet. If that wasn't enough firepower for the good guys, Angel and Wesley have assembled a team of random men to aid in the battle. I actually have no idea who these people are. I couldn't identify who any of them were in the background, but I guess they're helping. They're not the parents, because the parents had a different, seating arrangement, so it's not them. There are a few notable mortal things which happen to the side characters. So gay Larry, who I mentioned once, a minute ago, he gets thwacked by the mayor's tail and breaks his neck. Principal Snyder, who I luckily have not talked about this entire season, and who was being very annoying the entire time, he gets eaten. Harmony gets bitten by a vampire, so for all intents and purposes, she dies. And Jonathan, against all odds, survives. I think maybe it's because he's short, and so the tail and everything else just goes over his head. And also, Cordelia, she stakes her first vampire, ever in the series. And if you're wondering where Cordelia has been this entire time, by the way, she has been around, faffing about and, kissing Wesley of all people. And I will get to that. It's really not as interesting as it sounds. But here's the actually interesting bit. The Scooby Gang has previously concluded that in order to win out against the mayor, they have to taunt what remains of his humanity after the transformation. And can you even guess who that might be? It's Faith. So Buffy, she waves around a knife that the mayor bought for Faith, and it's the same knife that Buffy coincidentally stabbed Faith with, nearly killing her in the process, so it holds a lot of weight for him. So instead of feasting on the students like he's supposed to, he aggroes on Buffy alone. She runs into the school, and he basically plows through everything behind her. So she's running through the halls while he's completely decimating the cafeteria and every other familiar set. Buffy runs through the library at the end of it, and the mayor files in after her, destroying that too. But here's the best part. Buffy runs to the back of the library and tosses herself out of a window that's like behind the stacks, I guess. The mayor loses sight of her, and Giles, hiding out in the grass where Buffy lands, flicks a switch and sets off a massive pile of explosives in the library, not only destroying the library, but the majority of the school in the process. Oh, yeah, and the mayor's dead. If you're concerned, we saw earlier in the finale all of the main characters clearing out Giles' books from the library, but it's actually really sneakily done because they're talking about other stuff as they're doing it. So those books are fine. You're good. He's good. They have all their information. It's good. It's great. Awesome. It's perfect. I think I'm going crazy at the end of this video. It's just happening, you guys. It's okay. It was a long time coming. Anyway, the students on the school's lawn managed to fend off the vampires with minimal losses, and the good guys win. So, yeah. Ambulances and police arrive on the scene, and various injured people are escorted away. All of the loose threads have, for better or for worse, been tied up or exploded, so there's not much scene left to chew up. However, near the end of the episode, we are following Buffy walking through the crowd, the media, the ambulances. She's looking for Angel, but remember that Angel and Buffy have already broken up by this point. They've had their slow dance at prom, they met their resolution, and remember that Angel said he was leaving after the conflict ended. But instead of leaving so simply, Buffy does eventually spot him in the distance, standing just barely on her side of a rising fog. They don't approach each other and cry, they don't argue. For better or for worse, they understand this is for the best, even if it's not what they want in the current moment. Their expressions are solemn, and it's obvious they're sad, but there are no tears. This is for the best. Very simply, Angel turns away and leaves the series for good. And that's the end of season 3. I kind of want to scream because, my God, that took so long and I'm not even done editing it. I didn't anticipate 3 seasons to take up 3 hours, if not longer. I don't know the timestamp. Ooh. You may have noticed I was trying to speak less and less about things as I was moving forward. I was still trying to give all of the context and all of the important character beats and details, but it's not an easy gig. It's quite challenging. It's kind of fun, though. I did have one last point throughout season 3 that I wanted to bring up, and that's the plot surrounding Willow, Xander, Oz, and Cordelia. I didn't really touch on this because it's its own schmaltzy drama and it has its own resolution, and it feels fairly insular in and of itself. I made a comment earlier about how Willow completely and permanently gets over Xander, but that's absolutely not the case. Forgive me for the mix-up. I completely forgot about this plot. I think I repressed it, and it feels largely pointless anyway. Basically, Xander and Willow start becoming mutually attracted to one another in season 3. Willow, of course, has always pined after Xander, but there's a specific scene in episode 5, Homecoming, where everyone is preparing for the dance. Not the prom, which is episode 20, but Homecoming, which is different. Xander and Willow are both trying on formal outfits, and after a few failed dresses on Willow's part, they both step out from behind separate room dividers in really nice clothing, all gussied up. Willow's old feelings bubble to the surface, and Xander finally is able to see Willow come out of her shell as a beautiful, blossoming girl. They didn't plan it ahead of time, but getting caught up in the moment, they share an unexpected kiss. Immediately after, they freak out a little bit because both of them are very taken by other partners, but by the next episode, they're playing footsie in science class because they can't help themselves. Yeah, it's that kind of plot. It's just suffering, nothing else. Xander's 2-timing actions make his behavior in episode 7 Revelations even worse than before. I cannot stress it enough. This is the intervention episode we keep getting back to, because not only is he literally cheating on Cordelia with Willow, he's also letting his ancient feelings for a different girl who blatantly isn't interested in him affect his judgment and his decision-making skills. Inversely, it feels especially hypocritical for a man who keeps his legitimately shameful romantic exploits secret to then turn around and harshly criticize a girl who is keeping her own romantic exploits secret. And Angel's not even her lover or boyfriend by that point, to make it worse. The more factors that play into this scene, the more and more Xander's legitimate motives for not trusting Angel chip away from gross self-interest and envy and hypocrisy. But I cannot talk about this anymore, or else I'll probably just die. Oh, and Xander and Willow make out in the library in this episode to make the betrayal even more substantial within the moment. Willow, on the other hand, was fairly tame and the most forgiving of Buffy because she, in fact, saw the parallels between her situation and Buffy's. At one point, when they're alone, Willow tries to come clean about the affair, but chickens out. Episode 9 is when this plot all comes crashing down. It's the episode where Spike comes to town. Not only is Spike good at calling out the problems in the Buffy-Angel relationship, he also perfectly gives Willow and Xander a location to have their affair, because Spike has kidnapped them and stored them in his old warehouse. On their own, Oz and Cordelia are actually driving around town trying to find their partners, while Buffy and Angel distract Spike. And because Oz is a werewolf, he eventually smells Willow's fearful scent from, like, a country road, so they pull over to the side and make their way to the warehouse. Willow and Xander are basically on top of each other at this point, and they kiss. Understandably, Oz and Cordelia are upset when they find them like that. In fact, Cordelia is so upset she flees the basement by climbing the stairs that they just descended from. But because this is an abandoned warehouse and everything is very faulty down there, one of the steps collapses beneath her. What follows is Cordelia falls on the ground and her back is impaled through the stomach with a rogue pipe or something. There's a scene right after that where they show a graveyard where the camera leads you to think that, like, oh my god, Cordelia has just died. No, that's not the case. It's just a really big cheeky red herring.
So Cordelia's gonna be okay?
Cordelia's actually in the hospital and she's recovering fine, and needless to say, she's broken up with Xander. Oz and Willow are separated as well, but Oz, given that he's mostly unaffected by the world around him, is lucid and tries to understand Willow. He needs distance and he is very angry, but things aren't completely broken. Fast forward to episode 11, and this isn't about the romance plot anymore because that's basically completed. It's done, its rotation is finished. This is actually just a Monster of the Week episode, but I wanted to highlight that we are finally privy to Willow's connection with magic. All the episodes up to this point have her helping out with spells and incantations very gradually, much to Giles' worry, but for the most part, her investment has been pretty tame and helpful. This episode, Amy's back. Amy's back in the picture, but only this once in season 3. She's part of Willow's coven, which is revealed in this episode, along with some other, like, random goth boy, and they perform a protection spell for Buffy, and it's very cute. I won't spend too long on this one, but this is the episode where an evil version of Hansel and Gretel convinced Sunnydale's entire population of moms to form a mob and try to kill all the witches in town, including Amy and Willow. They're unsuccessful, spoiler, but in order to save herself from being burnt at the stake, Amy turns herself into a mouse. After the conflict is settled, Willow tries to turn Amy back into a human, because that's what you would want to do, but she doesn't know how to. So instead, she just, like, she keeps Rat Amy as a pet. And passively tries to, like, cure her throughout the rest of the season to absolutely no avail. I'd like to talk about episode 12 as well, Helpless, which centers on the relationship between Buffy and Giles, as well as the Watchers Council. But really, to save time, all I'll say is this is the start of Giles' defection from the Watchers Council because of their barbaric traditions. Buffy reasonably begins to loathe them as well. I don't know, for the most part, Giles is just a normal growing character in this season with very few significant plot points focused on him. Giles feels betrayed when he learns Angel is still alive, and in the episode Helpless, Buffy's trust of Giles is briefly tarnished. But it's all very simple beyond that because it always heals. Like I alluded to previously, after Jenny's death, I'm not sure the writers played with Giles as much as they could have. He has a lot of fun character beats in season 3, like in the episode Band Candy, where he acts like the Ripper again, but they're all very individual moments that don't weave their way into the main plot. He very much maintains the status quo. As for Cordelia, the writers really start to phase her out. After her breakup with Xander, she's not around as much, and then for whatever reason, she's back around again without cause. The first half of season 3 was really her bread and butter, especially when it came to episodes like Slayerfest and The Wish. But again, these are like Monster of the Week episodes, and she doesn't have a long-standing arc within the story. Near the end, she does have 2 character beats, neither of which I'm a big fan of. The first is relatively tame. She and her family lost all of her fortune and she's keeping it a secret, and she's not able to go to any of the colleges that she got into. Again, this season focuses a lot on what the future may hold, especially when it comes to secondary education and relationships. I think this wealth subplot functioned to shoehorn Cordelia into Angel's own show, because instead of going to an Ivy League school, Cordelia eventually settles in Los Angeles to become an actress, which is where Angel also goes to live. I think she does great on that series, but her end on Buffy is truly abysmal. The cast never says a proper goodbye to Cordelia, and when episode 1 of season 4 rolls around, she's just gone without pomp and circumstance. With the wealth issue, Xander learns that Cordelia is trying to save up for a prom dress, but she can't afford it. So Xander quietly pays it off for her, and they end on mutual terms. I do like this plot because it wraps up the relationship in a neutral way, in an almost positive way, and it removes all of the ill will between them, which might as well. But other than that, there's no significant character conclusion. The other Cordelia subplot is with Wesley Wyndham-Pryce, and I plain hate it. I just don't like it. Wesley must be in like his mid-20s when he shows up in Sunnydale, and the show portrays that they have an immediate reaction to one another, and it's supposed to be corny and weird and funny. But portraying it as corny and weird doesn't really mitigate the blow that this fully grown adult man is essentially drooling over an 18-year-old girl. I know our values around age differences in relationships has changed since the turn of the century, but even Giles remarks on their age at the prom and with contempt. It's just gross overall. It doesn't go anywhere because when they finally admit their feelings for one another by making out in the stacks in the library, they realize the other one is a horrible kisser, and that's all over. It was really just a plot to give them something to do very briefly. Cordelia does stake a vampire in the season finale, which is nice, because I know Charisma Carpenter, the actress, hadn't had the opportunity to do so on screen yet, so that's cool. But yeah, Cordelia's out. She's now irrelevant. Returning to Willow and Xander for the last leg of this season's discussion, after the romantic affair and all the breakups, Xander loses his virginity to Faith, of all people. Yeah, it's super random. It happens in the episode, the Zeppo, which was an episode all about Xander's own weird hijinks when he's alone. Despite not making out with Xander anymore, and in fact mending things with Oz, Willow is really dismayed and in fact heartbroken after learning this news. I mentioned this because later in episode 19, Choices, Willow has a pretty intense face-off against evil Faith. In this scene, Faith, thinking that Willow has come around to try and sway Faith back to the side of good, mocks her about this. But Willow is like, no, I don't give a fuck about you or anything that you do. I'd also like to point out that in this episode, Willow has a really outdoor combat game. At one point, when she's nearly preyed upon by a vampire, she telekinetically floats a stake behind the guy and stabs him, vanquishing him and saving herself. So she's built herself up a bit of bravado, and they throw insults back and forth at one another as bitter equals. The rest of the episode doesn't really amount to that super cool moment, but it's fine. And because episode 19 is called Choices, in a season all about choices, we also learned that Willow has gotten to pretty much every school that she applied to across the globe. Oxford, MIT, Yale, Harvard, but in the end, she decides she's going for UC Sunnydale with Buffy. I really want to criticize her for her choices because you should never ever choose a college based off of where your friend is going, especially if you have exceptional and paid for opportunities at a state or Ivy League school or even across, the ocean. But this part really redeems itself because Willow explains to Buffy that facing off against Faith made her realize she wanted to fight evil and help people, and staying in Sunnydale with her friends is the perfect place to do that. So ultimately, if she's following her dreams, I can't fault her. God. Am I missing anything? Did I ignore anything? I might have. But at this point in time, I don't know if I have the wherewithal or the spoons to do so. Do I have spoons? Do I use spoons? I don't know. I forgot. But if there was anything that I did miss and you want me to go over, you should mention it in the comments below. I'd love to sort of see them. I'd love to see any comments. I'd love to see interactions. Ooh, if you somehow made it to this point in time, I would hope that you leave a comment just to say, hey, hi, how's it going? Because I would love to get great feedback on this video. Can you see? I'm slumped in my seat now. This is like 3 months work, just like all falling down. All falling. All the tension of being like on screen is just like out of my system now. But anyway, I will wrap this up with a few random tidbits that I love across this season. The first is when Spike is in Buffy's home, because he was already invited in like last season, I think. And he taunts Angel by pretending to eat Joyce Summers. I actually really like this, and I really like Spike and Joyce's relationship. I'm pretty sure there is a Spike-Joyce friendship fan cam somewhere on YouTube. I really recommend looking for that. Literally fan cams for everything, anything. I saw one I keep seeing them on Twitter and I keep saving them. 2, the fact that in Band Candy, when all the adults are acting like teens, Giles and Joyce have sex on top of a cop car. Even better, a dozen episodes pass before that information gets out. And it's only because Buffy reads her mom's mind in the episode Earshot when she's telepathic. 3, and the last one I'll mention, is at prom when they're handing out superlative awards to all the students, Buffy unexpectedly gets her moment to shine and receives a new award called Class Protector.
We're proud to say that the class of '99 has the lowest mortality rate of any graduating class in Sunnydale history. And we know at least part of that is because of you.
I really enjoyed this because it represented the perfect combination of a teenage girl's ideals at prom and Buffy's obligations as a Slayer. It removes the suspension of disbelief that everybody in town doesn't know what's going on. They say, yep, we knew in some capacity and we are aware of you and we are appreciative. And that's cathartic. And that's it. That's the last bit of content. That's it. I'm giddy. I'm racking my brain on whether I should say anything else or cut things off right on the spot. But you know what? I think this is the conclusion. So what I will say is, oh my god, reviewing 3 seasons of a dense series as my first video ever was probably a very crazy and not the best idea. This last leg for season 3 took like over a month to like put together because I had things to do. But I did it. We did it. We did it together. You listened. You watched. I know moving forward that I'm going to cover a lot less material in these videos, but this is the kind of content that I really like to see in the world, so I'm going to stick with it more or less. I really want to keep this as a fun hobby to keep in touch with all my friends and family and maybe reach a few new people, I don't know. Other than that, I'm thinking of what all the famous YouTubers say. If you like this, please make sure to subscribe and give it a like as well, because who doesn't love a good I love seeing likes. I'm delirious. I'm gonna go out now, so please excuse me as I lay down and scream.